One of the men was holding a monster and told the commander that this was the last one for now, and the commander praised him. Li Kuei, who was accompanying them, said that they had collected a total of 7 monsters and now they needed to burn them. They couldn't believe their luck. They had managed to obtain such a valuable commodity. But now they had to hurry, as they were already expected elsewhere. However, the rain was a major hindrance, and besides, this rain looked very strange. It was the 1034th year of the Star Era, and a leak had occurred at the country's oil depot, resulting in natural disasters and even causing the Earth's crust across the entire continent to shift. As soon as the red rain began to fall, the entire population immediately began to transform into cannibals, or as they were called, predators. That is why this phenomenon came to be known throughout the world as the Bloody Rain, which takes the lives of ordinary people and turns them into terrifying monsters. But during the Blood Rain, superhuman powers awakened in some people, and they came to be called Esper, who waged a long war against the predators and eventually built 7 cities on Earth that became the pillars of the world, while everything else became a wasteland. In 2 hours, they managed to catch 4 packs of predators, though today they were unusually active, and on top of that, no one had encountered even a single person. They had killed so many predators, but their crystal cores were of a fairly low rank, so they wouldn't make much money. One man asked his colleague if he would quit this job if he had the chance, but the man said there was no need to worry so much since they were just talking, and right now they only had to guard their goods. They started joking that they were just nervous at the sight of the predators, and besides, they didn't have the strength to fight them off. And just as they were trying to get closer to them, they suddenly saw something. A giant monster had appeared behind them, ready to attack. All the guys got scared and started running, trying to use their powers, but realizing that their C-rank abilities were practically useless, they could only buy some time to escape. This high-class mutant possesses a certain level of intelligence and is capable of regeneration, thanks to the mutation it underwent. One of the men began to run faster and got further ahead than his colleagues, and despite being called a coward, he said he wouldn't be able to save himself, at least not on his own, since the boss would save him. Of course, he knew the commander wasn't of such high rank, but there might at least be someone there who could buy time for an escape. But suddenly he encountered other monsters that wouldn't let the guy go any further. As a result, he also failed to escape, and along with his colleagues, they were devoured without mercy. After a while, the monsters destroyed absolutely everyone who was there and left absolutely no chance for anyone to get out of there. But suddenly another guy came here who said that this was the end of it and shattered all illusions in this place. Moving on, he said the movie turned out to be very interesting, and then asked the man if he enjoyed watching his colleagues beg for help. He approached one of them, whose name was Yi Hu, and asked him where the commander was, but the man said he wouldn't tell him a single word about it. However, this didn't faze the protagonist at all, and he pulled out a scalpel, asking where best to start, while the man looked incredibly distressed witnessing all of this. The protagonist remarked that the man's forehead was too uneven and needed to be smoothed out, so he grabbed a few more scalpels which flew straight at him. The man began begging to be killed outright rather than tortured after the young man started moving the scalpel, but the young man told him not to worry since the problem was in his head, where there were some fragments, which is why it would take longer than usual. When almost everything was finished, the guy used his power to take away absolutely all of this man's memories, and the man screamed loudly. After a while, morning had already come, and he turned on the music in his apartment, listening to every word that echoed from the song. The main character held an axe in his hands, already splattered with red liquid, and was carefully doing something. After that, he picked up a drill and the red man began bleeding again, yet he looked very calm, as if he were calming himself with what he was doing. It was literally the final touch, and after a while, the guy prepared himself a very tasty egg, pouring red sauce over it. After a while, he began to eat, savoring the taste, but thought he should have put the tomato in the fridge, since he might never find another one as delicious as this one in the whole world. Looking at a single photograph, he remembered what had happened at that moment. He was sitting in a room with the bodies of other people, where he was the only one left alone. And as expected from a certain professor, Zi Yuchuan, Yuchuan possessed a talent that allowed the boy to stay alive, so he approached him. Ji Yuchuan said that he had killed absolutely everyone and was holding a teddy bear in his hands, so he asked if he had done the right thing, and the doctor replied that the boy was truly a good boy, and that was why he was taking him with him. The doctor replied that this talented boy would become his greatest creation, but soon he began to feel nothing but sheer madness at what was happening. The man told his other assistants to inject the test subject with a spastic serum and another solution, and then added that they should increase the current 20-fold. Zi Yuchuan continued to finish his meal while listening to music, but he still couldn't forget everything that had happened that day, which he remembered as if it were today. Despite all the suffering he had to endure during that terrible time, he managed to survive, after which strange abilities awakened within him. When his meal was over, the young man threw his knife at the wall, reflecting on how long it had all lasted and how much time had passed, yet he decided he should meet with his beloved director right away. After that, events unfolded in Analant, which had become the most prosperous city for people after the apocalypse struck. In fact, it was possible to live, work, study, and raise children in peace there, and everything was almost exactly the same as in the normal world before the apocalypse. Sometime after the boy arrived here, he met a little girl who handed him an onigiri and said she wanted to give it to him because he was the one who had saved her mother from the infection last week. Ziyu Chuan smiled, saying it was unnecessary since he'd already had breakfast, and suggested she keep it for herself. But she insisted that Xiao Yuan had made it, and added that the medicine he'd given them was too expensive, so she wanted to repay him in some way. In the end, he couldn't refuse, so he took the food and said it was very tasty. A little later, he said goodbye to the girl, adding that they would meet again soon. When Ji Yuchuan went on his way, it turned out that someone was following him. The man who was watching him said that no superhuman activities had been observed, but since the target was heading toward the bus stop, they began to follow him. The man who continued the surveillance boarded the bus behind Ji Yuchuan. The route led to the Anomaly Research Center, but after a while, it turned out that the man had lost sight of his target. He reported to the commander that the target had been lost, but the girl replied that she was aware of this and ordered the mission to be called off, since they didn't want to play hide-and-seek with Ji Yuchuan. After a while, the guy had already arrived at the Anomaly Research Center, where all information regarding superhuman or similar phenomena from all 6 cities, namely Beiji, Yuchuan, Yinchuan, Megu, Huaxia, Doyon, and Analanta, is collected. After a while, the young man went inside and said that the director had asked him to tell Wenji that new information had recently arrived at the archives, somehow too late, and that he too had arrived late. The young man explained that there had been delays with the bus. Another girl asked why the director had specifically instructed him to go to the archives if he had simply been on a business trip to the center. But Ji Yuchuan just smiled and replied that it was probably because he hadn't had similar assignments in a long time. An elderly woman approached him with a stack of papers, saying that 5 experts in their city had recently been killed and found in an abandoned factory not far from the city, which had shocked absolutely everyone. It turned out that these very people had smuggled in high-ranking predators, though the investigators had no evidence. But the woman said everyone should be cautious, since they were all powerless here, and if anything happened, they wouldn't be the first to survive. After that, the young man was called to the commander, and upon approaching the girl, she asked him about the task he had been carrying out. The man approached him, saying he should meet Lu Yao from Shentonbao, and now he was to be under her command, so they should exchange contact information for convenience. Lu Yao came closer, asking where they should start, and showed him a few more photos, telling the guy to explain to her what they were. There were several photos of different people, or rather their bodies, just lying on the ground. Ji Yuchuan noted that, judging by the decomposition of the remains, they had been dead for about 3 days, and all the wounds had been inflicted with blunt objects, so it could be assumed that the victims had been very frightened, and whoever wanted to kill them had done so with particular cruelty. Then the young man approached the investigator, saying that he believed they needed to look for a connection in their relationships, since revenge might be involved here. Lu Yao smiled and said that most experts of this caliber work on the black market, but their previous investigations into this matter had yielded no results. It's important because someone might be too quiet and inconspicuous to have carried out this massacre, so whoever is destroying them is far more terrifying and has no concept of humanity whatsoever. The young man said that this was a brutal massacre and could in no way be compared to the nobility of higher motives, so he wanted them to trust him specifically to uncover the identity of this criminal. However, the girl replied that this person had managed to eliminate experts not only in rank A, but also in rank B, so she didn't know how an ordinary Ji Yuchuan, who was merely a servant, could do everything he had promised. But the young man replied that he had sworn on his own life that he would do all of this, for to him it was an incredibly great honor. Lu Yao eventually agreed to meet, and she wanted to talk to him more often because it was interesting to her, and after that they said goodbye as she headed for the exit. The main character himself walked away and made his way all the way to the City of Roses, which was a bustling hub of trade and enlightenment, and it was here that anyone could find any goods or obtain any information they needed. The people who had just seen what time the trains departed were a little scared, since predators are most active at that very time. However, a local said there was no need to worry, since this wasn't the first time it had happened here, and the train was very popular and a tourist attraction that cost a lot of money. Paying just 200,000 coins pleasantly surprised this young man, since that amount of money could feed an entire family for several months. Meanwhile, Ji Yuchuan walked up to the train and saw a woman serving food in an empty car, so he asked her if dinner had been served. Suddenly, she turned toward him, her fingers strangely contorted, and then she began screaming and attacking him. But for the protagonist, this was no obstacle, and he easily dealt with her, striking her body just once with a scalpel. After a while, her head was already separated from her body, but she kept talking, saying that the authentication had been completed. Meanwhile, as the protagonist continued moving forward toward the strange portal, she kept saying some strange things. Before long, he found himself in the city of Haimigong, a hub of the black market where one could find absolutely anything a person could desire, regardless of budget. This place was governed by supernatural forces that concealed the true identity of every visitor, though the protagonist preferred conventional disguise. Of course, the fare here cost a full 200,000, as much as a first-class expert's annual salary, but that was the going rate on the black market. After a while, he had already taken his seat, and dinner was served to him, and the young man thought that everything here was just as disgusting as always. In the end, he spent the entire next day there. When the sun rose, he went to the cathedral. One of the clergymen continued to urge the others to pray, and after a while, they began their ceremony. The nuns standing beside the candles were supposed to offer prayers to their Lord, and after a while, using his power, he made it so that they all as one continued to say the exact same words. After a while, water appeared out of nowhere, but despite this, they continued to say their prayer regardless of anything. After a while, the very divine elixir they had been watching for and praying for appeared, and then hands appeared out of nowhere. This priest told them that the deities had simply abandoned them. There would be no more pain or suffering. In front of their icon, he raised his hand and said that right now they would see their deity. The man said that it was she who granted them happiness, and that as her faithful followers, they were always protected by her powers at all times. But at that very moment, the main character arrived with the gates, and he said he saw this darkness without a single ray of light in the man's soul. And soon 2 more girls approached him, saying that he needed to drink this elixir, and immediately afterward he would become happy, for he would find himself in a world without pain or suffering. However, soon the cup containing the elixir simply fell and shattered, and everyone else moved away from the man. The priest was very annoyed to see this boy, for he thought the boy had long since left this world. Ji Yuchuan was actually surprised, for 16 whole years had passed, yet the boy still remembered him, and then he pulled out a scalpel. Even after Ji Yuchuan had begun to destroy absolutely everyone while he was still a very young boy. After that, the priest ordered everyone else to destroy this boy and drive him away, for he believed that Ji Yuchuan must suffer the most terrible punishment after behaving so horribly. However, despite the fact that a crowd of people pounced on him, he was able to stop them using his own strength, for he was one of the experts known as the Dream Creators. His ability controls space and everyone within that space at a certain distance. Seeing this, the man said that he himself could handle Ji Yuchuan, since he was significantly stronger than all these people. However, the protagonist was merely pointing out that this man had remained exactly the same as before, and was simply reveling in the fact that he was pitifully manipulating others there. He considered it an incredible weapon that he could still control without any hindrance, and it was precisely Ji Yuchuan who was the finest creation he had ever managed to create with his own hands. The gypsy monster began attacking him and wreaking havoc throughout the temple, but the protagonist managed to dodge successfully and avoid every single blow. The priest, continuing to control this creature, asked if the boy liked his new, unrivaled creation. And after that, he added that he was ready to give the boy a chance to repent and atone for his own sins. Ji Yuchuan just laughed, saying he was very sorry he couldn't become as much of an idiot as the one this man had created. Besides, he was completely useless. He began tying up all the monsters, preventing them from moving, and added that if the tool refused to obey, it was no longer of any use. He tried to do something, but the monster was completely bound by these magical threads. Finally, the protagonist leaped up again, holding his scalpels in his hands, and once more tried to land another series of blows on his opponents. The man who was a priest tried to fend off these blows, but he couldn't do much, so he was injured. After that, Ji Yuchuan said that he wasn't his target, so he wasn't going to waste his time on him. However, the man then said that he simply wanted to put him in his place after everything Ji Yuchuan had done earlier and how horribly he had treated him. The young man recognized another man and said that he was behaving exactly the same as before, just like a rat scurrying around the corners gathering things. Ji Yuchuan recognized his principal, who was standing with a cane and slowly making his way toward them. The priest said that Ji Yuchuan simply had no conscience to speak that way to such a distinguished person, but the principal merely ordered him to be eaten. Immediately after that, the priest was frightened, for he hadn't even expected the director to say something like that and simply get rid of him right then and there. After a while, the man looked at the priest, saying that this guy could only scream and nothing more. He was definitely incapable of anything else. After that, the protagonist stood before him, and the director said he wanted to see just how much stronger the one he considered his finest creation had become. Ji Yuchuan once again lunged at him and began attacking the monster in order to finally destroy his opponent. But it turned out he couldn't attack him using his own abilities. The director was already holding strings in his fingers and said he had created this puppet specifically for this purpose with the boy, adding that he should think carefully about what to do next. Ji Yuchuan just smiled, saying that for him this was actually a great honor, and then laughed. The protagonist exclaimed that despite all this, he didn't need any abilities like these at all. After a while, he started coughing up blood, and the director added that the puppet was much better than he was, since it didn't feel pain, unlike this guy. The man came closer, descending the stairs, saying that he was giving the guy one more chance, his last, to come back to him. Ji Yuchuan wiped the blood from his face and said he was grateful for the offer, but believed the director had already taught him absolutely everything he could. Then he added that the director himself had taught him to lure the victim into their own trap. And after that, he said to crush the victim with the very monster that had once been the victim's companion. Of course, the director was very shocked by what had happened, because he understood that this boy had no connection to that monster, so he didn't know how Ji Yu-chuan had managed to avoid a single blow from the creature. The boy laughed, saying that the man's senility must have set in due to old age, and remarked that the man himself had helped him do all of this just recently. Then he created a shield around himself, explaining that he had prepared in advance for everything that could happen here. As it turned out, over the past 16 years, Ji Yu-chuan had become a true A-rank expert, and he still remained his greatest creation, despite the fact that the boy had left him. Ji Yu-chuan stepped closer to the director, saying that he wanted to repay all those huge debts over the past 16 years, because if it weren't for this man, his parents might still be alive. The man stared him in the face, and the director shouted, saying that he had no right to think that the organization had destroyed his parents, precisely because of the talent that had awakened in this boy, since it was said that his parents knew things they were not supposed to know. Ji Yu-chuan listened to everything the man said and asked if he meant that his parents shouldn't have known the secrets the organization was hiding. The director just smiled, saying that the boy was still just as attentive to detail, but added that from now on he would only ask questions of Ido. Immediately after that, the gates to hell opened, and it was a mystical ritual of sacrifice that summoned a demon. A contract was formed between the demon and the human, binding him for the rest of his life, but when the human departed from this world or all the terms of the contract were fulfilled, the demon would be set free. After a while, a giant dragon appeared before him, and the director looked at him with a smile. After that, he was ordered to destroy this man right now and devour him. A short time later, that's exactly what happened. The protagonist stepped closer, saying that this could be revenge for the pain the director had forced his parents to endure. The man didn't understand what was happening at all, because it was he who had summoned this demon and was supposed to control it himself. No one else could have done so. Ji Yu-chuan merely smiled, saying that as soon as he saw this man, he immediately created several scenes using his own ability. After that, he put on a wonderful show for them, and the boy asked if they liked it, since this set piece involved an intrusion into the victim's consciousness that creates a certain future in his mind. He also added that he couldn't just ask the principal who had destroyed his parents, and besides, he didn't want to let this man leave this world in peace. But it turned out that the director simply couldn't convey all these words on his own, so tying a noose around his neck, he said that someone else would do it for him. Immediately after that, another pentagram appeared above the main character, resembling the previous one, and he simply stepped back, unaware of what was happening. Literally a moment later, Ji Yu-chuan saw a beautiful girl sitting on a turtle, holding the director's head and silently staring at the young man. Literally a short while later, reporters immediately arrived at the cathedral because something strange had begun to happen there, and a thick fog refused to lift from the area, so a decision was made to send a search party there to determine what was going on. The protagonist was still inside, and the monsters continued to attack him one after another without stopping. The girl who controlled them all ordered the boy not to try to fight back, since he was just a human, and added that it was a great honor that Chelsea herself was summoning the most terrifying hellish creatures to get rid of him. The young man realized that after using the prop, he became weaker for a certain period of time, and, at times, couldn't even use his ability, and this side effect could last a very long time. So before he collapsed from exhaustion, he needed to end the fight as quickly as possible. After a while, he managed to subdue these creatures and said that now her servants couldn't even utter a word. Chelsea, of course, was very annoyed and called him a complete idiot, saying that he simply had no right to touch the royal servants with his own hands. But the protagonist replied that he had merely tweaked the flow of power she had been controlling just a moment ago, and that was how it turned out. Besides, he said that she herself had stopped speaking as if she had grown weaker after that. But those words deeply offended Chelsea, so she grabbed a whip with a dagger at the end and said she could never forgive him for this, and would fight to the very end. After that, Ji Yu-chuan sent her own monsters at her, saying she could have fun with them as much as she wanted. The girl was confident in her abilities, saying they wouldn't be an obstacle for her. And indeed, there was no obstacle for Chelsea here, for she was able to destroy them in literally a matter of seconds and immediately went after her main target, not intending to let the boy escape. But literally a moment later, she still managed to hit the main character, despite the fact that he was putting up a good fight against her. Ji Yu-chuan was now just lying on the ground, feeling only one thing: an incredibly intense headache that he couldn't shake off. Realizing what was happening, he ordered her to get out of his head immediately, but she replied that he simply needed to surrender his body and stop resisting her. The protagonist simply replied that if she wasn't honest with him, he would just surrender to the men who had come to check on the situation in this temple. So she realized he was essentially blackmailing and threatening her. The men who had entered ordered everyone to prepare for an attack, as they had seen that there were most likely predators inside. But as the specialists moved further in, they began to realize that this wasn't a battle between them, because this creature certainly couldn't just be a predator. They ordered a search of the entire area to find out if there were any survivors. If there were, they needed to be taken to the research department, and after that, they began moving forward. Meanwhile, Ji Yuchuan was holding a small sphere, and Chelsea said that after so many years, she had finally managed to appear here and had been eagerly awaiting this moment. A man sitting in a chair remarked that Chelsea was certainly no match for his servant and ordered him to eliminate her immediately. After a while, the protagonist stepped outside and walked past the bonfire, thinking that since the predators in the vicinity had been eliminated, he could safely spend the entire night here without any trouble. After a while, the same side effect from his ability to blend into the scenery was supposed to kick in, and he began to think that he should still be very careful. Eventually, after a while, the guy just couldn't hold on any longer and fell asleep, since he was too tired to stay awake all night. Chelsea sensed this moment and appeared before him, cupping his face and telling him that he could sleep soundly, but he had already become her slave. After a while, it turned out that the technology was ready for the first shipments, but before that, all the reports on the number of tests had to be sent in, and this girl added that her husband had promised not to work on this wonderful day, but despite that, he was still sitting at the computer. He just turned around in a hurry, apologizing, and said that they would go to the park later and their son would play with his father as they had agreed. However, as they drove on, they saw a flock of crows. There were an incredible number of them, surrounding the car. The boy got very scared and clung to his mom, and it also became clear that he was actually feeling worse now, so they decided to go to the hospital. And then, after a while, an accident happened. Although, despite this, it turned out that the child was alive, so the rescuers still decided to take him to the hospital because it was the only option. Soon, a strange voice began to be heard, saying that he needed to wake up because all of this was actually unreal, even though the boy was delighted by it all. Despite all this, he kept recalling fragments from his childhood, when he was brought to the new house and what he did there afterward. It was said that today he would become an employee of the Anomaly Research Center, though the boy was surprised that a dream could awaken such vivid memories in him. Chelsea was already ready to destroy him completely, saying that this man was simply pathetic, and added that this was his last dream, which could even be considered a gift. But after a while, the protagonist woke up, opened his eyes, and said that her spell no longer worked, though she was surprised since it was Chelsea who had been controlling this space, only to discover later that her rival was a specialist in creating illusions. Chelsea realized that she had been able to uncover these hidden secrets in order to later turn him into her slave, but his aura was far too powerful compared to hers. Ji Yuchuan, taking a scalpel, said that in her perfectly crafted dream, he could hurt her quite badly. But at that moment, she began to cry. I think because it had been so hard for her to get here and she simply couldn't go back. So she began to beg him to just let her go, since she considered herself a small, cute demon. Ji Yuchuan had no intention of giving in to such provocations. They say that since Chelsea was actually the strongest demon, the girl promised to do absolutely anything he wanted if he let her go. But at that very moment, she thought that if he made her feel even the slightest bit of shame, she would reduce him to dust. The guy just replied that she was simply wasting her beauty by being there. After that, she finally got angry and, using her power, caused a pretty powerful explosion that sent the main character stumbling back a few steps. After another powerful explosion, he finally began to get up from his knees, but it was clear that she was incredibly furious about what had happened. The girl said that he hadn't even been able to touch her precious horn, so she immediately began attacking him again. Ji Yuchuan had no other choice but to simply run away, realizing that he had angered her too much and that he would no longer be able to stop Chelsea. But at some point he realized that his threads could deflect absolutely all power attacks, so he understood that this might be his chance to survive. She was already incredibly close and ready to destroy him right then, but he managed to stop her at that moment by using his power. Literally at the very last moment, he managed to throw the car right at her, and another blue explosion occurred. Of course she survived, but she was furious that he had dared to injure her. However, she noted that the boy had no strength left anyway, and just a few minutes after that bloody rain, his body was growing very weak, so she wanted to make a deal with at least someone as soon as possible. Chelsea said that since he didn't want to be her slave, she had a slightly different proposal, but realizing that he was very strong, the only option left was to devour him. The girl soared upward and her face already looked a little different, and she said that Ji Yuchuan would now become nothing more than food for her. Suddenly, she fell to the ground, and another figure appeared above her. This demon said that he had managed to find her after all, despite her attempts to escape. Immediately afterward, a fierce battle broke out between them, and Chelsea was hurled into a car parked nearby, smashing through the windshield. This demon took off his hood. They say that Chelsea clearly doesn't look like the strongest demon in all of hell right now, because there was a demon ranking system, and all 36 were arranged in a specific order based on their strength. The higher a demon was, the higher he was in the ranking, which means he is stronger and more dangerous. But suddenly, the main character stepped closer when Chelsea said that this idiot simply couldn't recognize the simplest illusion and dared to speak to his own queen like that. The side effect of the blood explosion allowed her to maintain control of the foreign body, so she knew this demon definitely wouldn't be able to overpower them too quickly. Chelsea, of course, knew that such a body was completely useless, but they would definitely be able to destroy this demon, and it wouldn't be an obstacle for them. When this demon lunged at them, she was able to block his strike using the power of Ji Yu Chuan and then push him away. Another one of the main characters came to his senses and said he couldn't take it anymore, but Chelsea got very angry, saying that he simply didn't dare to contradict her. "Don't even say that trash isn't always trash," she added. "And if I get hurt, you're done for too." The main character wasn't about to give up either, and immediately afterward he grabbed the demon's body, though he didn't understand how it happened, since now their hands were frozen together by ice. Chelsea said he would be to blame if her body were harmed, but the guy replied that he was just trying to destroy their common enemy, and she was just getting in the way. After that, the demon continued to attack. The main character said he had only one enemy left, so he asked her to give him control over his own body, because only then could they get rid of the enemy. She replied that she could lend him some of her power, but warned him to be very careful, because he could simply burn up because of her. Zi Yuchuan was pleased to hear this and said that since the situation was already like this, she should show absolutely everything she was capable of. When it was all over and the demon was defeated, Chelsea was surprised because she had thought her power would overwhelm the boy. Moreover, the demon couldn't understand how a human could contain the power of such a mighty demon, and began to wonder if they could have already made a contract. He thought that this boy was incredibly strong on his own. I then pulled out a syringe, trying to save myself somehow. The injection he administered to himself was literally his last resort to have even a chance of surviving. He needed even more strength to escape from here and overcome his enemies. But the protagonist wasn't going to give up either. Using his chains and the dagger she had given him, he declared that this demon must vanish along with Chelsea right now. Suddenly, the protagonist lost sight of the demon, realizing just how fast it really was. It still managed to knock Ji Yuchuan to the ground, and it laughed, saying that this guy was just an ordinary person, and his life would end just as ordinarily. But literally a moment later, 2 blows struck his body, and now the demon was finally finished. He didn't even realize what had happened, and the girl began explaining that using a demon's power without signing a contract was incredibly risky and also very difficult. But there was a better solution: lending him her body. That's exactly what they did, and with the power Chelsea possessed, they managed to destroy their common enemy quite quickly. Once everything was over, Chelsea began to say that it had been quite difficult, but she was already starting to recover. She also saw that Ji Yuchuan was feeling very unwell and picked up his body, saying that a human body was too fragile and weak. But as she continued to carry him in her arms, she said he had no other choice. In any case, it was better not to save her, and to try to save himself, since that was more important. She tried to bring him to his senses, but he replied that no one could change his choice, and even the queen certainly couldn't do it. And just as the protagonist was trying to come to his senses and Chelsea was helping him with that, he became her and found himself in the girl's past. But then, realizing that these were merely her past memories, he understood that he needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. Looking around, the boy saw several more monsters, in fact, an entire army, chasing after a few who were trying to escape and were rushing away quickly. And not far away, he saw Samochitsa, who was holding her weapon and trying to fend off those she considered her enemies. At that very moment, the memories cut off, and the protagonist woke up. The first person he saw was Yaka, who was overjoyed that he had finally come to his senses. She approached him, and when the boy asked what had happened to him, the girl simply called him a very foolish person. Chelsea moved even closer, saying that she hadn't saved him at all, and the boy realized that he was simply frozen in place and couldn't even move a finger. The girl said that he simply had to feel her power, and it was because of this unshakable aura that he couldn't even move. Moreover, she said that they simply wouldn't be able to raise a hand against each other. Chelsea explained that from now on they were one, so even if they wanted to, they simply wouldn't be physically able to harm each other. Zi Yuchuan now understood that Chelsea had been banished from hell for bad behavior, and now had to wander the human world. But the girl replied that she had simply started a war against the demons that lasted 200 days. Then she began to tell him that as soon as she arrived in this world, she immediately understood the local rules, and while they were drinking this tea, she realized that the drink was indeed very delicious. The main character was more interested in the mark that had appeared on her, so he asked what it actually meant. The girl just stared at him, and when he started asking what was wrong, she simply told him to shut up. She explained that in hell there is a special ranking of demons where they are all arranged by strength, and the number on his body indicates his place in the ranking. The number was 1, so it turned out she was first, but the girl said that unfortunately, after the king was gone, all records of the rankings and memories of all that were permanently erased. But once she entered this world, she realized she needed to devour all the ranked demons in order to regain her memory, which is why she offered to sign this contract. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan remembered that they hadn't destroyed anyone yet. He drank the same potion the commander had given him. Moreover, he even remembered him, though he wasn't sure about it. He decided to give it a try and asked if it would work, having already realized that Chelsea was also a target of Blaze and that they could join forces. She pushed him away, saying that he had already come close when he was able to see her memories, but the girl replied that she could help him avenge his family, and in turn she told us that he would help her return to first place in the rankings, and that would be the basis of their agreement. Ziyu Chuan added that he agreed to these terms but also wanted to add a few of his own, saying that he wouldn't have to give orders or take control of her body whenever he wanted, even though Chelsea tried to stop him, saying that he simply couldn't do that. The girl said that with such words he simply wouldn't survive long, but he stopped her again, reminding her that she was the strongest demon. Although Chelsea was angry, she realized that it was with him that she had been able to establish such a strong connection. So if Ji Yuchuan didn't sign the contract, no one would be able to fully utilize her power. So the girl sighed and agreed, and in the end, they did sign the contract. The young man replied that he was incredibly exhausted and wanted to rest at least a little. Meanwhile, the organization's headquarters reported that the most powerful explosion of demonic energy had occurred, so they ordered a squad to be sent to handle the situation, and it turned out that everything was much more complicated than it seemed. Yao said she could buy some time to sort all this out, so they decided to stall for at least a little while. Meanwhile, the demons continued to feed on the bodies of others who were already nearly powerless. But literally a moment later, several trucks drove right over him, and someone there said that the world had changed too much, and that from now on, predators were destroying their own kind. The man said that all they could do was wait until they stopped devouring one another, and perhaps then things would calm down enough for them not to go hungry. The young man pondered the fact that demons have no consciousness, and although it's very strange, these low-ranking ones can create a predator so similar to themselves. He asked if they were definitely predators, since they didn't fit any classification by appearance, but the man replied that perhaps Ji Yuchuan simply hadn't listened to the news in a long time. Well, it's spread all over the world, but it started in Meguye. Not long ago, the authorities released a new official classification, and it turned out that their researchers had discovered the hunters, and they were classified as third-rank infected. He gathered himself and said it was good that he'd met this man, since he hadn't been in this city for a long time and hadn't known about this. He was certain that the city's authorities were definitely hiding something. The driver suggested they go together since he definitely wouldn't be able to handle it alone right now. And besides, prices for bodyguards had skyrocketed after the new classification was published. In the end, they were traveling on a road guarded by the authorities, so it shouldn't be dangerous here. They were just waiting for the moment when they reached Atlanta. The driver laughed, saying he'd just have to take his word for it, but suddenly there was an accident behind them, and one of the vans simply crashed and exploded. Someone else got out of that van trying to save themselves, but those demons had already started attacking them, so they tried to dodge their blows. The driver tried to attack the creature, attempting to save the others from the attack. He moved closer, saying that this was definitely a trap, and they needed to get the wounded out of there as quickly as possible because it would be very dangerous. Literally at that very moment, the same demon attacked him, but just as the man was ready to say goodbye to life, someone suddenly destroyed it, preventing it from harming the driver. It turned out to be Ji Yuchuan, and the man thanked him for saving him. However, despite this, there were many hunters standing before them, blocking the path and leaving no way through. The man had already resigned himself to the idea that they would remain there until the end of their days, but Ji Yuchuan merely sighed heavily, noting that they seemed to be overly fond of this psychological pressure tactic. Meanwhile, Chelsea suggested using her powers against these wretched demons, as she was confident she could destroy them instantly. When the driver began to see what was happening, he was already relieved, though he was very surprised. He realized that they all still had a chance at survival. Watching what Ji Yuchuan was doing now, he had already begun to fear these demons and himself, because even he couldn't understand who he was. The young man calmly replied that this was payback to these people for picking him up in the middle of nowhere and bringing him here. And then he rushed forward again to destroy yet another monster, of which there were still an incredible number. Despite their numbers, the young man skillfully and quickly destroyed each one, giving them no chance to survive, for Chelsea's power allowed us to reduce them to dust. She was happy when he hit the target, but said that next time she would have to deal with this data herself. Ji Yuchuan told her she wouldn't need to eat these demons, and the man who had been the driver happily walked along the road toward the rescue team. Lu Yao and the others had already arrived at the scene and realized that, fortunately, everyone was okay. The driver tried to say that no one had been hurt, and Ji Yuchuan said that the rescue team had arrived just in time. Fortunately, nothing had happened to them. He wasn't going to talk about everything that had happened, and Ji Yuchuan hinted that they should keep quiet about it. But the driver was already beginning to realize that this guy was definitely hiding something from all of them. Lu Yao was relieved to see that everyone was okay, and the other assistants reported to command that their eyes had been captured and most of them destroyed. The girl moved closer to him, saying that Ji Yuchuan really knew how to surprise people, but the boy replied that she probably hadn't expected anything else from him. Lu Yao simply created a barrier around them and moved closer, saying that no one would hear them here because the barrier blocked any sound. The boy was surprised, for he now realized that the spatial shift was actually the work of expert Lu Yao, but he still stood silently until the girl said what they needed to hear. She asked if he had already signed a contract with the demon, for she had learned that this was most likely the case. Chelsea immediately asked if he wanted this woman destroyed, but the guy replied that there was no need to rush because if Lu Yao had the audacity to meet them alone, she must have set quite a few traps, so he wanted to find out what she wanted first. Zi Yuchuan just said he didn't understand what the woman was talking about, but she replied that he shouldn't play dumb with her and then asked if he'd heard of Heavenly Wrath. It turned out to be the very same organization made up of many powerful people that had emerged after the Red Rain disaster. It was dedicated to the extermination of predators and operated worldwide. She explained that she wanted to introduce Ji Yuchuan to the team because he was the one who could help exterminate these creatures. The boy simply said that he hadn't expected Lu Yao to also be a member of Heavenly Wrath, but replied that her offer was certainly wonderful, though he had too many other things to do. The girl replied that he shouldn't rush into a refusal because joining Heavenly Wrath was the best choice regardless of what he wanted to do next. She added that members of Heavenly Wrath could freely enter 95% of cities and could fully increase the power of both their own abilities and their demon contracts. Ji Yuchuan asked what would happen if he refused her offer after all. The boy asked if she was going to throw him in jail if he didn't agree to the offer. Lu Yao simply replied that everything depended on his choice because those who sign a contract with the demon must unofficially either join the wrath of heaven or cease to exist in this world. In the end, the young man understood the gravity of the situation and said that since he had indeed signed a contract with the demon, he was ready to join the wrath of heaven. But he also really wanted the right to choose his own missions, and Heavenly Wrath had to share absolutely all information about the demons with him. Lu Yao was surprised when she looked at him at that moment, for she had the feeling that a giant poisonous snake was watching her, and the girl realized that the contract with the demon was very strong, so she was glad that this plan could soon be completed. Ji Yuchuan immediately asked, "What about her? Sell her to me." And when they appeared, the woman added that she didn't know where they had come from, because while records of demon appearances had existed for many years, this information had only recently begun to spread. She only knew that they most likely possessed a certain ability to restrain the predators. Ji Yuchuan replied that if they had already found out about this, it would be better to tell everyone, but instead they were simply bringing the demons to the predators, to which the woman replied that human fear was based on complete ignorance. Too much knowledge only caused panic, and whether they were demons or predators, they were, in any case, monsters that could harm them all. She replied that people, no matter how much time had passed, always liked to hide things, and the young man realized that this Heavenly Wrath organization likely had even more interesting information about demons. Then he smiled, saying that if the woman had shown sincerity this time, he hoped for a future collaboration that would last a long time. Lu Yao simply welcomed him to their team, but he just walked past, saying he'd save the handshake for later and told her not to let him down. Lu Yao added that tomorrow morning she would arrange a meeting with the person who would drive him to the airport, and she wanted to show him the apartment there so that he could get to know the other team members. After a while, the protagonist returned home and was about to make another tomato salad for dinner. At that moment, Chelsea was in the shower but suddenly came out, saying that human things were too complicated to use and that she had broken the shower. Ji Yuchuan quickly ran to the bathroom, realizing he could never leave her there alone, since who knows what else she might get up to. The guy saw that the place was flooded with water and realized that the whole night would most likely be spent cleaning the bathroom. Ji Yuchuan had even thought that she might be casting some kind of curse on his kitchen, so he decided to run back as fast as he could. She was already standing in the kitchen completely naked and continued to eat what he had prepared for his own dinner, saying that this food was much tastier than what he had given her before. Ji Yuchuan was, of course, very angry that she had eaten his dinner, though she didn't understand why the queen couldn't eat when she was so hungry. In the end, he couldn't fall asleep because of the excitement from the previous night, just as Lu Yao had said, lying that there were supposedly some insects in the kitchen. In the end, she didn't care much about it and invited the boy to headquarters, saying that the people from Heavenly Wrath were already waiting for their arrival. They went inside and saw massive nerves. It turned out that in order to establish a base in Sontenberg, the Heavenly Wrath curator was most likely a high-ranking member of the local alliance. Zi Yuchuan replied that he had thought the base would be located inside, but Lu Yao told him that Santenberg had the most advanced security system, so there was no need to worry. The girl invited him to follow her, saying she would show him absolutely everything there was to see. Then she handed him his ID card, which listed his room number. The Heavenly Wrath base is divided into several floors: the laboratory, the dormitory, the cafeteria, the testing center, the training center, and the mission center. First, they need to assess his abilities as well as his physical stats, since everyone who joins Heavenly Wrath is required to undergo this testing. A short while later, the two of them entered the lab, and the boy asked if he just needed to go inside and wait while they evaluated him, to which Lu Yao replied that if he wasn't sure, he could take the test with her. Zi Yuchuan decided to leave Chelsea outside after all, and upon entering the testing capsule, the assessment of his abilities began. But barely a few seconds into the test, an alarm sounded. None of them understood what was happening, but it was too late to stop anything. The capsule seemed to have started exploding, and there was nothing they could do about it. Lu Yao was truly surprised, realizing that this level of spiritual vibrations was exactly what she had been searching for all these years. Ji Yuquan emerged from there safe and sound and apologized for the fact that, because of him, the machine had broken down after all. It turned out that his physical formula was rated only at level B, but his mental ability level was significantly higher, at level S. The girl explained that mental-type psionics usually have long-range attacks, but his level B physical form was almost surpassing the threshold typical of ordinary Heavenly Wrath participants. Since his level is so high, they could skip the other evaluations, and she said that would be unnecessary. After a while, Lu Yao took him even further and showed him the research center, and it turned out that this was the real reason the girl had invited him to this place. In fact, with such a large-scale research center, the Heavenly Wrath demons should take certain measures, but Chelsea replied that she was worried Lu Yao might consider them his test subjects. The instructor reassured her, and as they walked further, Lu Yao began explaining that the beings we're dealing with didn't appear on Earth long before the Red Rain disaster, and this research center is actually the result of earlier efforts. Heaven's Wrath is simply using it again for its own purposes. The girl explained that this was merely its surface function, but if one dug deeper, one could find much more useful information. Ji Yuquan now understood that the demonic aura he had sensed on the way here belonged precisely to what he now saw before him. Lu Yao said that no one knows why the demons appeared on Earth, but the evil energy they emitted infected countless people, leading to the emergence of predators and psionics. The boy thought they might be connected to the source of power, but he wouldn't be surprised if the demons could awaken the predator's consciousness. Lu Yao went on to explain that communication channels and systems for all ranked demons were located beneath the Tree of Technology, and sending all the demons back into those channels could end the catastrophe once and for all. She said that this was the only way they could defeat the demons, which is why the girl believed that Earth needed Ji Yuquan's power. The boy just smiled, saying that in fact he didn't care at all about the future of Earth, since that wasn't something he wanted to tie his life to. The young man added that compared to that, his contract with the demon was something Lu Yao had arranged, as he had already figured out from everything that had been happening. Chelsea started ranting about how they needed to destroy this woman right now, since she was just like the director and was convinced that Heavenly Wrath had definitely planned something evil. But Ji Yuquan simply told her to shut up right then and there. The guy replied that there really was a long fishing line cast out there, since she had managed to plan so many moves for the parade and had done it very professionally. They began to fight, and Lu Yao realized that if it weren't for her ability to control space, this guy would have destroyed her literally a second ago. Right then, he told Chelsea to take control of him, since this space was simply suppressing his powers, even though the girl said he had no right to command her. But literally a second later, she found herself bound and had no idea what was going on. It turned out that Lu Yao hadn't been able to grab her and place her in another barrier, and of course, Chelsea started to get very angry, ordering the woman to let her go. Lu Yao explained that this was a new technology they were working on, and unfortunately, it wasn't fully refined yet, but it was well suited for testing purposes. Ji Yuquan thought that perhaps not all the subjects were clueless, but at least this research center had achieved some kind of result. After a while, even though he tried to keep struggling, he realized he simply couldn't move, and literally a second later, looking around, he saw a girl with pink hair and a bow in her hands. Lu Yao said her name was Xia Na, then approached the boy closer, basically explaining that, like this girl, he was a wonderful employee with a 0 failure rate. She also mentioned that this girl's only failed mission was a case involving the trafficking of young girls, which was linked to Yi Hu. It was this very excellent colleague, as she called her, who revealed the true nature and identity of Ji Yuquan. Shadow demons can conceal their presence, so Lu Yao said he hadn't even noticed that Xiana was using an illusion that affected the mind. After seeing the video she sent, they became interested in Ji Yuquan's abilities. Thus, his powerful mental energy plays a key role in any contract with demons. But the protagonist didn't give up and wasn't about to just give in, so he grabbed Lu Yao. And of course, Xiana began to defend her, ordering him to let her go immediately. Ji Yuquan just smiled, saying that everything was now in his hands, and told Xiana that if she wanted her boss to stay alive, she should let Chelsea go, even though Lu Yao had ordered her not to listen to him. Despite this, the girl stood her ground, and since the protagonist was forced to defend himself, he released Lu Yao from his threads, creating a barrier around himself. He said they had gone to such great lengths to deceive him and force him to come here, but it didn't seem very noble. Seeing what was happening, Xiana realized that the shadows had warned her this boy's demonic power was too strong, and things could end badly. Lu Yao stepped closer, saying that she had simply wanted Xiana to test his abilities but hadn't expected things to spiral out of control. And then she apologized for her inappropriate behavior. Ji Yuquan simply said calmly that he hoped no more such mistakes would be made, while Chelsea considered these people hypocrites. as it seemed to her that they were even worse than low-level demons. The girl also said that she had assembled a team where everyone was a demon contractor, and they were currently short on a team leader, so she asked if he was interested in the position. Lu Yao added that of course he wouldn't work for free, since, as a high-ranking demon, he could deal with other demons if he wanted to, and Heavenly Wrath would provide him with the demon's favor and all other comfortable conditions for free. The protagonist realized that Heavenly Wrath's objective also included high-ranking demons, and using their power could help him fulfill the terms of his contract faster. He thought it would be much better to get rid of a demon like Chelsea as soon as possible. Then the boy asked what the next steps would be, and he was told that the Tower of Tears would be their next destination, since that is where the powerful demon resides, and tomorrow morning, together with Jiana, they must defeat him. Meanwhile, the guy was supposed to meet up with the other team members, and she was thrilled that the perfect demon hunting squad had finally come together. Meanwhile, one of the assistants, standing inside the building, monitored the fluctuations, noting that they were still within normal limits. Another guy kept eating something, saying it tasted really good. And yet another, holding behind his back the weapon he'd just used to destroy yet another demon, was simply laughing, literally bursting with laughter. Zi Yuchuan returned home a little later, lay down comfortably to rest, and poured himself some wine. He still couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened to him in his childhood, and he recalled the moment when the experiment on him was completed and the results were passed on. Back then, he was told to prepare for the next experiment, and it wasn't until the protagonist was with Lu Yao during this test that he realized these two devices were absolutely identical. Blaze and Heavenly Wrath might have a connection he knew nothing about, even though he'd never heard of the Thousand Faces, and if it was hidden within other organizations, he understood he could fall into a trap. Meanwhile, she moved closer to him, taking a glass of wine despite the fact that he'd said this was a men's bathhouse. But for some reason, she replied that she was a demon, and demons don't worry about such things, they couldn't care less. And then she moved even closer to him. Grasping his face, she asked if he was saying that because he had some kind of fantasy about her. After that, she began to use her spellcasting power to enchant him. As long as she controlled his dreams, she could interfere with her victim's mental world, and there shouldn't have been any problems with that. So she wanted him to simply submit to her and ordered him to surrender his body to the queen and not resist her, since she believed it wouldn't lead to anything anyway. But suddenly, Ji Yuchuan grabbed her hand, saying that her thoughts were written all over her face and that things weren't as simple as she thought, because he hadn't succumbed to the spell. Zi Yuchuan said that he never underestimates his opponents, so he knew exactly what to expect from her and was prepared for it. He saw her past again, where a little girl stood, a dagger in her hands, terribly frightened, and even though she was now considered the demon queen, she still felt terribly insecure. Only after some time, when she had gained enough power, did she begin to truly fight, and with that power, she started destroying those who had plotted against her and caused her harm. She quickly moved away from him using her own power, saying that intruding into her memories had consequences and no one had the right to do so. Ji Yuchuan was actually surprised that those were her memories from just a moment ago, as he hadn't expected to see any of this right now. She was truly angry with him and said he'd have to prepare for punishment, already grabbing the drawstring of Ji Yuchuan's robe. After the robe flew off, he just stared at her, not understanding why she was doing all this. Eventually, morning came again, and they arrived at the very mission Lu Yao had mentioned earlier. They asked why that woman hadn't teleported them here right away, since it seemed to her that people were wasting too much of her time, and she was, after all, the queen. Zi Yuchuan explained that such teleportation requires a great deal of spiritual energy. Her actions were intended to intimidate them, not for anything else. While they were talking among themselves, another guy suddenly appeared and immediately lunged at the main character, but he dodged in time. Shana immediately approached Sigrism, saying that he was their new partner, not an enemy to be fought. However, he still had no intention of stopping and said that Bella had told him she didn't like this smell at all, so he began attacking him again. Before Ji Yuchuan could even defend himself against the attack, another man stepped in front of him, and this man said it was highly unethical to treat their new colleague that way. On top of that, he saw that even Guzer was trying to stop him using his own power. Xiana stood before him, saying that her older brother should calm down. Besides, Lu Yao had ordered all of this, and he couldn't disobey her orders. Sigrism looked at his weapon, and the demon sealed within it said that for the sake of his lord, he would endure and no longer fight. Xiano replied that she had sent all the mission details, and since they had little time left, they now needed to carry out a secret mission that had emerged 3 months ago. 4 reconnaissance teams had been dispatched, but all of them had lost contact with headquarters, and so far the fluctuations in demonic energy were characteristic of high-ranking demons. So the girl said that the target was most likely to be a high-ranking demon. Immediately after that, the same man who had protected the protagonist came to him and greeted him, introducing himself as Ba Yin. The protagonist also gave his name, and Chelsea said that this man was definitely stronger than Ji Yuchuan right now, so they warned him to be careful. Eventually, the whole team was assembled, so they set off together to carry out the mission. But at that very moment, those small demons began attacking them. Sigrism managed to protect his younger brother and told him to be careful, since these creatures could move through water pools and had more advantages here. Guzer asked if his older brother would protect him, and Sigrism simply assured him that there was no need to worry, since he wouldn't let anyone harm him. Sigrism believed it was his duty as an older brother to protect him, so he immediately rushed forward, determined to exterminate every single monster there. Guzera realized that his older brother was just as impulsive as he had always been, though he understood that this was normal. Even before she stepped inside, Ba-In had been saying that they needed to move together, since the demon barrier could conceal their presence, making their progress easier. He also thought that while Sigrism and Guzera truly acted as a duo, a rookie couldn't act independently. That would be far too reckless on their part. Xiaona replied that this mission had been specifically designed as an initiation test, but there were 3 stars here, and since he was a newcomer, he needed to be truly very strong, though realizing that their commander had sent him on such a task meant their colleague was indeed very powerful. Ziyu Chuan, meanwhile, kept walking, but Chelsea said they were just going in circles, so she asked if he knew anything at all and if he understood where they were going. The protagonist replied that they had most likely stumbled upon the spirit wall, and Chelsea responded that everything here was covered in this sticky stuff, and she found it disgusting to be here. These monsters appeared literally out of nowhere, and there seemed to be no end to them. Besides, they really reminded him of mermaids. Literally a second later, a mermaid-like creature that was rank 31 actually leaped at him, and then they began demanding that he give her the child. Chelsea started saying that maybe he should agree to all this, since maybe this girl would gladly let them go, but Ji Yuchun just told her to shut up again. He struck the mermaid, saying that one should only have children with those one loves, and apologized to her, calling her a beautiful lady. When the mermaid heard this, she immediately took his words as a proposal and began thinking about whether they would have children, and how many there might be. She also began thinking about what names would be best for them, since she knew that among humans it was customary to give children certain names. But when the next blow came, she screamed loudly, saying that she hadn't even managed to find out his name and hadn't had time to ask. Meanwhile, Sigrism took his younger brother away from there and asked if he was hurt, and although Guzer said he was fine, he noticed that the older one was wounded. Ba-In smiled and replied that this is what happens when you don't follow orders, and in the end, this was what Sigrism deserved right now. The younger brother asked about the newcomer and what had become of him. Sigrism, who hadn't given the newcomer much thought, didn't expect him to be lying there half dead, since he hadn't believed the newcomer could be of any use to them. Xiaona immediately looked at the map and saw that Ji Yuchuan's life signal was still present, so it turned out he was fine. Meanwhile, she sat in a separate bubble with a barrier that wouldn't let her out, and she ordered the mermaid not to touch him, or rather, the queen, but the mermaid still wouldn't listen to her at all. She began to say that she really liked Ji Yuchuan very much, and that she wasn't going to let him go under any circumstances. The messenger thought about signing a new contract with him, and in that case, they would never part, not even for a moment. And in the end, there was only one step left to take. But very suddenly, the protagonist opened his eyes and said he wasn't interested in raw food. Then, taking a scalpel, he plunged it in, leaving her no chance at all. She started screaming, saying it hurt incredibly. Immediately after that, she came to her senses and was no longer trapped within the barrier, and then added that this game had actually been quite interesting for her. She began to laugh, saying she hadn't even expected this stupid creature to let its guard down, but the mermaid was truly feeling only excruciating pain right now. It was as if she were remembering what had happened to her long ago, and it was the very same pain she had felt long ago when she saw the boy unconscious on the shore. They began spending a lot of time together after the mermaid saved him, and at that time, the girl was truly happy. But not everything was as good as she could have imagined, because very soon that happiness turned into suffering. This guy took her to an auction, thinking he could make a fortune off her, and eventually they brought her out on stage, saying that mermaid meat was so rare it might only appear once in a millennium. For him, it was a wonderful chance to make a lot of money, because it was so valuable that the money came very easily. The mermaid, remembering everything that had happened to her back then, simply couldn't take it anymore, because it was incredibly painful for her to have gone through all that, and after that, another explosion occurred that nearly knocked Chelsea and Ji Yuchun off their feet. The mermaid began to say that once he became nothing more than a lifeless body, he would surely be able to be with her forever, and they began to merge even more deeply. Chelsea then decided to use full fusion, even though she hadn't had such an exciting battle in a long time. However, shortly thereafter, she found herself inside Ji Yuchuan's body in order to join forces and defeat their common enemy. Immediately after that, they began fighting each other, and each used their powers to defeat their opponent. But this battle was destined to drag on for a long time. The protagonist realized that if she managed to hit him this time, the blow would turn him into mere dust, so he was simply lucky to dodge it. However, in reality, right now he was incredibly excited in the best sense of the word, because he simply wanted to win these exciting battles. Very suddenly, the mermaid appeared right behind him, and then the boy realized that she had the ability to turn into water and move through it as well. Of course, this gave her a huge advantage, but after calculating everything and devising an instant strategy, the protagonist still managed to catch her and plunged another scalpel into the creature's tentacles. It was incredibly painful for her, but the girl immediately used her powers to summon a giant tornado right at him. After what happened, she was even more enraged. And of course, it seemed that high-ranking demons possessed special powers based on the rules. The higher their rank, the greater the power they wielded. He noticed that his opponent's speed had increased significantly, so now he would have to be more careful than he had been before. Ziyu Chuan moved forward, saying that something that couldn't be caught simply had to disappear, and Chelsea asked if he had a plan right now. The protagonist replied that they would have to be patient for a bit, and that it would be very noisy here, but this plan was sure to work. In the end, he did what was necessary and then began to use his power, nearly burning her, which made the mermaid incredibly hot. Ziyu Chuan eventually gave Chelsea the order to start attacking, but then the mermaid began to recall what had happened in the past and simply refused to believe she would die this way. She just couldn't accept it. She remembered everything that had happened back then clearly, how she'd been put up for auction and was about to be sold to people who believed that eating mermaid meat could grant eternal life. She'd clung to that guy, begging him to save her, but he didn't care at all. He just wanted the money, despite all the words he had spoken earlier and when he asked if he liked her. After some time, they embraced and lived a happy life, but that too did not last long. At some point, she became so hungry that this hunger blocked out everything before her eyes, except the need to eat, and only later did she realize what she had actually done. Finally realizing what had happened, the mermaid thought that it would truly be better for her now to simply leave this life, for that would be deserved and very just. Ziyu Chuan saw what was happening and realized that the mermaid had blocked out all her memories precisely because of the pain, so as never to remember this again. Meanwhile, Vici was already ready to finally devour her, having previously frozen her using her partner's power. But very suddenly, Ziyu Chuan stopped her, and Chelsea just asked irritably why he was doing this and not letting her finish the task. The young man replied that it was definitely not worth provoking the wrath of the heavens over a 31st ranked demon. Besides, they needed her information to gather other ranked demons, so they had to stop now. Given the contract's restrictions, Chelsea couldn't inflict injuries that would render him unable to survive. But if he took another blow from her in this state, it might indeed end fatally. A short while later, in a different location, a young man lay on the ground, utterly helpless against a monster that was ready to devour him right then and there. Xiana noticed there were certain problems and began reporting that Dorney was in need of their help right now. Moreover, Lu Yao needed the entire squad immediately. They couldn't leave yet, but suddenly saw a giant chunk of ice fall from the building. Sigri stepped back in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Ziyu Chuan quickly bound the chunk completely and then turned to them, saying they had to destroy the demons. And that was exactly what he was doing now. The others were surprised to see that he was fine. Moreover, he had become the one who defeated the demon in Guzer. Smiling, he replied that there was indeed a problem with their information, since this demon definitely didn't have the rank he had thought. But Xiao Na responded with something completely different at that moment, adding that the information wasn't wrong. On July 1st at 4:22 p.m. in the Era of Stars, a 31st rank demon was captured by the squad. Ba Yin approached the protagonist, clapped him on the shoulder, and said he was glad to see him in their special forces. Ziyu Chuan simply replied that it would be better to skip all this pleasantry since his head was spinning, and then asked if Ba Yin was the holder of the contract for the barrier demon. Sigrism and Guzera stood back, saying that fighting such a powerful demon alone was truly unbelievable, so he wanted to challenge Ziyu Chuan to a duel. Xiana said he could start a fight with anyone, but only after he finished the mission, since their main task right now was to support Dorn. Of course he was furious, but he said he wanted to finish this mission as quickly as possible because once the problems were resolved, they could settle the score. The protagonist realized that the truly powerful ones likely hadn't revealed their true faces yet, so he took what the guy said in stride. Once they got into the car, Chelsea told him that the guy named Ba Yin sitting next to them looked pretty tasty and she'd eat him up. Where I am, warriors hide their presence, which makes them ideal for evading attacks from predators or other demons, and this skill is very useful, but maintaining where I am while on the move consumes only energy and requires serious mental effort. What? She asked. Do you know what kind of person you need to be to make a contract with a demon? After all, there are only two types of people. One is a thief, and the other just has secrets. Ziyu Chuan sighed, asking what kind of person she thought he was, and Chelsea replied that he was clearly the type of person who was just incredibly terrible and also had a lot of secrets. It was clear that this city was a prison run by the erotic faction, and most likely many demons would arrive there soon. Dorn was a place where all criminals gathered, and those who had broken the Alliance's laws lived there, working to at least somehow atone for their mistakes. After some time, the squad was already on site, and the captain was informed that the fog around this place resembled the one that had appeared in the Temple of No Shadows earlier. But here the concentration was higher, and it turned out that their existing protection methods weren't as effective in this location. On top of that, they were told they'd lost contact with 2 teams, and the signals from the survivors of Team 3 were starting to fade. Plus, the lab was considering the possibility that there might be some living forms in this fog. Lu Yao told them to track the signals of those still alive and also urged them to ask the lab to speed up their work to determine how much more information they could gather about this fog. The girl realized that now all they could do was wait for the demon squad members to arrive here, since there was nothing else they could do. Meanwhile, another one of these creatures continued to devour the others, saying that it tasted incredibly delicious. But suddenly, another demon arrived and reported that 3 days had already passed, and these creatures had most likely completely wiped out the entire city's population. But he didn't want to distract this demon from devouring, though I realized it was very difficult to communicate with such low-ranking trash that could barely string 2 words together. He approached, saying he had come here to remind them who the real enemy was and that he was already very close. He also wanted to remind them of their plan and agreement. Everything else was left to this monster, so the demon told him not to disappoint him this time. Meanwhile, Lu Yao explained that 3 days ago, Dorn had been attacked by unknown creatures, and afterward a strange fog had appeared, cutting off all communication. None of the teams she had sent out had returned. She recounted all this and asked for everyone's thoughts on the matter, since the fog didn't resemble the kind that appears when demons are summoned, so she believed it was somehow connected to that. Also, since it destroys everything that moves, it was unclear how to get there. Someone also suggested that they could go with Xiana to the development site, but Lu Yao objected, saying that this time Xiana would go there with Ji Yu Chuan. Ba Yin replied that the boy was still a novice and not really suited for the mission, but the girl said that he had used his barrier demon the entire way, and asked if he could handle the mission perfectly after a day and night of such tension. Sigrism and Guzera are skilled fighters but aren't suited for this kind of work, though of course they didn't like hearing that at all. Lu Yao replied that she didn't want to add unnecessary risks at the start of the mission, which is why Xiana and Ji Yu Chuan were the best candidates for this mission. The boy said he'd take that as a great sign, but he was ready to handle the mission on his own. And then he remembered that the Blaze organization was deeply interested in summoning demons. So, perhaps they were behind what happened in that city, and he wanted to investigate it. Lu Yao replied that Xiana was much more familiar with carrying out missions, so this time she should go with him since he was still a novice. At that moment, she thought the girl just wanted them to be watched, but Ji Yu Chuan simply replied that they would do things their own way anyway, and Xiana wouldn't be an obstacle to them. She had merely temporarily stored her abilities in a cube that then allowed others to use them. And of course, the boy hadn't expected Lu Yao's abilities to be used in this way, but as they moved forward, Xiana told them to wait. When they had gone just a little further, they saw a mountain of bodies, and next to them, a pack of predators that continued to devour them. Both of them stopped, and the girl realized that the demons were feeding these predators, so the situation turned out to be much more complicated than they had thought. Xiana immediately sprang into action and told the boy to remove the barrier 2 seconds after her command. Eventually, they managed to defeat this predator, but suddenly another man appeared who was surprised that the 2 of them had special abilities. Lu Yao had mentioned earlier that if they didn't encounter any survivors, they should use the identities of the Santenberg Alliance. That way, it would be more realistic than simply being perceived as just another small group like Heaven's Wrath. So the protagonist said they were from that alliance and had come to help the city, and then the boy asked who this man was. The stranger exhaled calmly, realizing they could be trusted, but then immediately added that this was definitely not the place for conversation, and asked them to follow him. Xiana replied that this guy was very strange, but according to the information they'd been given, even if it was that same mouse, they still had to pursue it in any case. Before the catastrophe of the Blood Rain, this city was called Momong, and it was often flooded, so the underground system was highly developed, and the people in this place survived precisely because of that. Ji Yu Chuan realized that this man knew the area very well and had lived here for quite a long time, and the man explained that he had lived here before the disaster, and that this was his hometown. In reality, it's hard to find for those unfamiliar with the underground structures, but the place they'd arrived at could be called safe. Chuli just remarked that there was a terrible smell here, but he paid no attention to it, and then asked Yoris if it really was that safe here since he didn't see any survivors. Literally a second later, an attack began, and the guy laughed, saying that most likely they were all criminals being held in this place, but Xiana insisted that they'd just talk first. But in reality, there was no time for that, because they saw the Source Stone above them, a rare mineral that appeared after the Red Rain disaster, and possessed the ability to store certain powers. Yoris approached the nearest one, saying that the surface was severely damaged, and he simply couldn't find any medical supplies, while the others began anxiously asking what they should do, because if they didn't take the antidote, they wouldn't even be able to survive. Ji Yu Chuan realized that the Exiles faction couldn't control so many criminals without banned substances, and Xiana remarked that this cage most likely served as a means for the faction to control them. Yoris explained that this was the place where they used to live, but life in eternal darkness and constant struggle had truly worn them out. The man added that what they call the blue poison simply saps their strength every second and robs them of the ability to live. Shauna said that if it was so painful, they could have refrained from committing crimes in the first place and then figured out what to do next. Besides, the barbed wire hidden in their wrists could be explained as a temporary tool they had to use during the disaster, but the equal length of their middle and index fingers is the result of training for crime. Jorah suddenly snapped, saying that they were too arrogant to even understand their pain. But the woman standing behind him told him to calm down, since getting the antidote from them was the priority right now. She said that their people should deliver transportation, supplies, and medicine by evening. Otherwise, she said they would wait here until the two of them passed out right there. Shiana just said that she would also like to contact them, but Dorne was completely shrouded in fog that was blocking all signals. These people started yelling at them not to play games, since earlier Ji Yuchuan had said they were with the Alliance. And if they could get inside, there must be a way out. The guy realized there really were a lot of problems here, and next time he needed to try to understand people's true intentions before getting himself into trouble. Eventually, they had stalled for enough time, and he asked if the Shadow Demon had recovered yet, and if they could start acting right away. It turned out that besides these 26 people, there were 14 more hiding here, and the Shadow said they were all under control. In that case, the protagonist suggested opening this so-called cage, and Chelsea replied that they should have done it sooner, since an ordinary Source Stone simply isn't capable of blocking demonic forces of such power. Zi Yuchuan pulled out a knife, saying that they should see what exactly happened in Dorne and what other secrets the city hides. Meanwhile, in the same dungeon, some other people were trying to get inside, collecting stones, and they had already managed to gather more than 200 blocks, so their task was finally complete. "Guys," he asked quietly, "has anyone noticed that there are even fewer people around lately?" But there was no point in speculating since there were only 2 years left, and then they would be able to leave this place for good. He was just curious why the Exiles faction was looking for these stones, but suddenly a guy appeared behind him and said they had no right to talk right now, because they needed to work. He shouted that these people simply weren't allowed to talk at their workstations, and besides, they had significantly more work today than usual. These people turned to Brian, saying that he was simply abusing his power for his own revenge and behaving horribly. He also told the other workers to move faster since time was limited, and there was still a lot of work to do. He added that if it weren't for the kindness shown by the Exiles faction, all these people who were criminals would have long since disappeared from this world. Brian replied that enough was enough for today, and that it was their turn to have lunch with their highly esteemed guests. So he took out the handcuffs and they all went to the designated meeting place. The younger brother asked his older brother if he didn't think these people were behaving incredibly strangely today, and the older brother agreed, saying that he had also noticed this unusual behavior. It turned out that one of the demons had spoken to the leader of the Exiles faction, whose name was Hobart, and told him that it was time to start the banquet right now. Immediately after he said this, the predators pounced on the prisoners, starting to bite them, and the captives didn't even have a chance to escape. The older brother realized that everyone from the Exiles faction had turned into predators, so it seemed to him that these people had conducted some kind of experiment and, as a result, had become this way. Another captive approached Juarez, saying that he was good at picking locks, so he begged him for help, and another captive also approached him, screaming for help. The boy himself saw that these handcuffs were made from the stones they had gathered, which meant that rough stones could suppress the abilities of the demons present here. Their leader watched closely what was happening, though he hadn't expected such rats to show up at their feast today. Realizing that their plans had changed, he decided to act differently as he didn't want to ruin the other steps he had devised. Very suddenly, Juarez was wounded and fell to the ground. Though his brother tried to protect him, it all ended even worse as the monster managed to strike the younger one as well. Juarez watched as his brother barely breathed, but the younger brother said that he no longer needed to do dangerous things for his sake. He just wanted to return to their little helmet and live a peaceful life there. With his last breath, he began to talk about how much he would love to try Aunt Lynn's apple pie, which she baked very often. Juarez simply couldn't hold back his tears, and he said that as soon as they got out of there, he would definitely buy him as many of those pies as he wanted. He just begged his younger brother to wake up. He began to cry even harder, saying that they still needed to return to their little village, plant lots of flowers in front of their small house, and then everything would be fine. But the younger brother could literally no longer speak, so he simply begged his brother to survive no matter what. Just as his eyes were about to close, another monster appeared behind Juarez and reached for him. Despite this, Juarez scooped up his younger brother in his arms and realized he had to do something. He didn't just want to survive, he wanted to uncover all the secrets of this city. Meanwhile, Ji Yuchuan realized that the demons had joined forces with the predators, and most likely their target was the criminals of Dorne. Xian Na replied that she had given these people medicine to at least temporarily calm them down, but she didn't know how long the effect would last. All these shadows protect them for a certain amount of time, and if these people are in danger, the shadows will be able to help them. But at that very moment, another chain suddenly appeared, stretching toward the two of them and nearly snatching Jia Na and Ji Yuchuan. In any case, as soon as they leave here, this guy will devour every last one of them. But he just laughed, saying he never even thought they'd be able to find him here. Ji Yuchuan stepped forward, asking if this was the demon behind the fog that had engulfed the city, and he also asked what had happened to the people who had come here earlier. He started asking them if those people were their friends and then laughed, saying he was very sorry because he had eaten every single one of them, adding that they were delicious. He also began saying that now it was their turn to become his dinner, and started using his power in the form of fog. This demon laughed harder and harder, saying that in this fog, he was an absolute god, and everything obeyed only him. Zi Yuchuan and Xia Na heard something and tried to create a shield with Chelsea's help, but she begged them not to leave her alone with this trash. Xia Na also grabbed her bow, realizing she hadn't even expected the enemy to pursue them for so long, and felt disappointed in herself. The girl realized she had let her guard down too much if she hadn't noticed such a long pursuit, and this disappointed her. Ji Yuchuan, meanwhile, noticed that the air was starting to get sucked into the fog along with the demon, and turned to Chelsea asking if it was normal that there was almost nothing to breathe here. The girl replied that demons adapt much better to different conditions and their bodies aren't as heavy as human bodies. Meanwhile, this thing we're walking through seems to be having a lot of fun fighting the air, and in the end, it's its unique and incredible technique for fighting people who can't survive this. Continuing in the same vein, they'll definitely speed up the depletion of oxygen soon, and besides, this is sucking out all their life energy. Ji Yuchuan realized they definitely couldn't keep this up any longer because they simply wouldn't be able to breathe, so he asked if Chelsea could hear him. Meanwhile, the girl began to use her power, saying that no low-ranking demon could command a king, and started attacking him. He, in turn, began to say that most likely, the contract didn't grant him certain abilities, but regardless of anything else in this fog, he was the strongest. At a certain point, the demon, along with Ji Yuchuan, realized that Chelsea had managed to dispel the fog, and it became clear where their enemy had been hiding all this time. He began to laugh, saying that they had managed to destroy the mask that the Lord had given him, but this only made him laugh even more. Thus, he managed to wound the demon, but the demon said that even if they struck his true body, the fog would not disappear, and they would not be able to escape from here in any case. Ji Yuchuan replied that humans were not as weak as they thought, and had far more endurance than he currently anticipated. In fact, the demon began to see that this man was using chains to dispel the fog, and noticed that the fog really wasn't much of an obstacle for this guy. Xiana could breathe normally again and took several greedy breaths through her mouth after the fog cleared. The girl noticed that Ji Yuchuan and his contract demon had managed to make it practically impossible for her, and she became curious about what else they were capable of together. Eventually, this demon began to flee as fast as he could, saying that this time he would let them go, and in the end, he simply wanted to escape in order to return to his own lord. Xiana, grabbing her bow, said that this time she wouldn't let this demon escape because she had to catch him and prevent another disaster. But very suddenly, a small demon appeared amidst the fog and began to cry, saying that it was simply shameful for such an incredible person as him to be destroyed to such a state. Ji Yuchuan picked up the poor guy and said that Chelsea could eat him, but the girl replied that it looked terrible and disgusting, though the boy could absorb his power. This demon started screaming that he was too weak and didn't have enough power to do anything, but despite that, they still used him for their own purposes. Shauna moved closer to the guy, saying she'd wanted to ask him something for a long time, and noted that his contract didn't allow him to take human form. But suddenly they were interrupted by a message, so the girl got distracted, and it turned out that someone in the demonic squad also had a demonic contract with the humanoid, so he needed to find out even more information about these people. It turned out that they could now be reached by phone, and on the other end, they were ordered to evacuate from Dorne as quickly as possible, since that was now an option, though the enemy was closing in on them again. Suddenly, more people arrived, and among them was Juarez, so he informed them that they needed to move on and asked who they were. Shauna said they were a rescue team sent by the Alliance. Moreover, they weren't part of the Exiles faction because otherwise they would have been destroyed the moment they were spotted. A woman nearby said these people were indeed right, because ultimately they simply had no other choice. They would either die here or try to survive. They were already ready to follow them, but suddenly another explosion occurred, which of course stopped them, and they retreated. Very suddenly, another demon appeared here, with the faces of nearly a dozen people on it, and it began to say that it needed 2 more people to finally complete its transformation, and it attacked Yoris, who was standing nearby. The other people were terrified and began to flee, trying to regroup somehow and begging for help. Shauna remembered that demons devour souls directly, so she didn't understand why these people were still conscious. The protagonist asked if Chelsea could sense this strange energy. She replied that the demon's scent still lingered here, but she couldn't distinguish it right now. So the boy realized what they needed to do in this situation. He grabbed his scalpel and lunged at the demon, intending to simply cut through all those tentacles, and continued attacking it even more fiercely. Joining forces with Chelsea, he grabbed her chain with the dagger at the end and once again struck the demon right in the body with all his might. When the guy turned back, Jiana asked why he always had to act so impulsively and aggressively. It seemed like he simply didn't know how to do it any other way. After Ji Yuchuan attacked this monster, he began to realize that it was in great pain, because although the chains couldn't absorb any demonic power, they still dealt a blow that was painful. This demon began to cry, not understanding why he was being beaten and mocked, and started screaming that he wanted his mother. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan realized that this was not a predatory demon, and although Xiana didn't believe that could be the case, things were actually getting even more interesting than before. Ba Yin stood next to Lu Yao. They saw these predators and thought that most likely those predators had been infected quite a long time ago. All the predators in a frenzy stormed out of the city after the fog cleared, and most likely the main point was that I wasn't there to block the entrance to the city in order to prevent these creatures from breaking out. Seagrism was shocked that the fog had actually been protecting them rather than acting as a barrier, but now they had destroyed it. The girl said that the fog was indeed a protection, and Bayan immediately reported that he couldn't re-establish contact with Ji Yuchuan and Xiana's signals at the moment, and he had no idea what was happening to him inside the city. Lu Yao understood that it was quite difficult for humans to become infected in just a few days, so most likely Dorn was hiding a 5th-level predator. Meanwhile, the others were fighting this demon. Although this creature regenerated much faster than a 4th-level predator, its intelligence was significantly lower than that of a 5th-level predator. Xiana was already ready to shoot when the guy asked if she could neutralize this creature, and the girl immediately fired an arrow at him. Ji Yuchuan rushed forward to attack as well, but said that pretending to be such a pitiful demon was really low. In the end, he did manage to attack it, but then he started saying that it hurt him to see all the delicious food spilling out of Xiana, and he just couldn't bear to watch it. In the end, his act just didn't work, and most likely he'd simply have to eat everything here. Ji Yuchuan was shocked to see that this demon was devouring the shadow demon Xiana, and that this guy was getting smarter while his abilities were constantly growing. After a while, the demon came closer, asking if he could eat them. The protagonist realized he couldn't wait any longer, and that the time had come to give it his all. He turned to Chelsea, telling her that in a moment, he would no longer be at her disposal and she could do whatever she wanted with him. These were truly sincere words to her, and after that, the girl used her ability. It turned out that the patient had not survived a difficult childbirth long ago due to massive blood loss. But the doctor's omission was correct, because for someone still growing, mental strength is their greatest weakness. That is why, taking the scalpel, he said he would help them put an end to their sins right now. But despite the fact that the mother was already nearly unconscious, she began to beg him to spare her child, An, and to have mercy on her. This demon appeared behind the protagonist and spoke the child's name. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan simply couldn't move and had no idea what was happening or who this creature was. But then he realized it was the Dreammaker, though he didn't understand how he had ended up here. After that, the demon picked up the child and said he would take her and look after the little boy. Only then did Ji Yuchuan say to deactivate the true words, for he had not expected to encounter the Dream Creator here, who had ruined absolutely everything. After a while, he came to his senses and realized that the true words were still active, and he hadn't done what he wanted. After the boy looked up, he saw the true form of the end predators, and the monster had already begun attacking him, intending to destroy him. Literally at that very moment, the boy teleported to a completely different location using his barrier. But the predators were still there and were about to attack him. At that moment, she used her power to protect him, and also fought the monsters that were there, though she managed to say that all of this tasted absolutely terrible. She thought that maybe the boy could turn all of this into something edible, and in that case, at least it would be possible to eat it. After that, she stepped forward to attack her opponent, but someone acted much faster than she expected, and an arrow flew straight into the monster's body. Chelsea was annoyed when she saw that Jiana Lisa was meddling, so she told the girl not to get in her way, and let her deal with these creatures alone. Xiana simply replied that the shadow had informed her that a powerful force was approaching them, and most likely it was the predators and demons from the city that Xiana had descended upon in this battle. In the end, things were looking grim for them, because if Ji Yuchuan didn't come to his senses soon, they simply wouldn't be able to survive due to extreme exhaustion, so they hoped the boy would wake up after all. That predator had turned into a tumor after Ji Yuchuan invaded its body, and it was intriguing to wonder what exactly it would turn into next time. Chelsea glanced at the protagonist, saying that if he survived, this queen would recognize his strength as a partner. Xiana remembered that the boy had called this girl Chelsea, and she realized that the demon was just as stubborn as her contractor. After that, the girl grabbed her bow and, holding 3 arrows at once, was about to shoot at the monster, realizing that only they were left and they couldn't let the other monsters escape. Ji Yuchuan, meanwhile, had finally woken up, but realized that the creature was too fast, and he simply couldn't predict the demon's movements, or know for sure when it would attack next. He fought the predator An, who was in his true form, and said that his body still didn't quite understand what was happening, so he wanted to try again. Suddenly, the teacher approached him, calling Ji Yuchuan worthless trash, and then said that she was a very generous queen who had taken pity on him and saved his life. The protagonist replied that all they needed to do was fulfill the promises they had made to each other, so she couldn't just stand by and watch as he left this world, bidding farewell to life. But the boy also noticed that from now on he could communicate with the Dreamweaver, though he didn't understand what had happened earlier, or why he himself had been unable to command the realm of true words. True words affect only those whose mental state is weaker than the user's power. And when the shell was broken, the mighty core began to corrode the space of true words. Thus, the mental state and power were created from a mixture of many kinds, but the core was a single pure force. The protagonist realized that his speech shell consisted of the people he had devoured, and the core was the predator itself, named Anne. It turned out that this was the very same untainted child, and she was the best candidate for cultivation. Therefore, the protagonist realized that the creature he had encountered in his memory was most likely a demon, but he didn't understand why he needed to cultivate such a pure predator, or what the point of it all was. Suddenly, the predator attacked them again, saying that what had been done to him was very painful, and that everyone who felt sorry for him should be destroyed. Seeing that the monster had lunged at Ji Yuchuan, Chelsea quickly stood beside him and shielded him with her own body. Then, with her last ounce of strength, told him to deactivate the space. The protagonist did just that and deactivated the true words immediately after she asked him to do so. A short while later, the boy approached Xiana. "I'm sorry for waking up too late," he said. "Also, Chelsea asked me to tell you that she considers you a good colleague." Xiana was a little surprised to hear this, but she was pleased to hear it. However, she also thought that Ji Yuchuan had definitely become stronger and even resembled her master. After some time, there was only one demon left for them to deal with, and they needed to destroy this formidable creature. Otherwise, the mission would not be complete. Ji Yuchuan recalled that upon awakening, the Dream Creator had absorbed this creature's mental power, but he hadn't even expected the creator to evolve based on that power. Nevertheless, the injuries they had sustained were instantly healed. At that moment, a small demon leaped out of the shell, and the protagonist said he would deal with it. At that moment, Xiana had to do everything in her power to contact the others and report their location. Meanwhile, this demon realized that all the energy he had gathered had been absorbed by the Elder, and now he truly could not live here, so he decided he had to flee at any cost. After a while, he saw the Dreamweaver and started crying, telling his father that he was wrong, and then mentioned that he had already devoured 5 million people, so he had been very obedient. But the Dreamweaver wouldn't even listen to him, saying that what he hated most were those who lied to him. Ji Yuchuan remembered that what he had seen in the Predator's memory resembled a demon, and he recalled the face of the one he now saw before him. Now the boy realized that this demon was an old acquaintance of Chelsea's, but the girl sighed and said that she only recognized the strong in this world, and she could not acknowledge such a vile demon. The Dreamweaver, of course, was enraged that she had called him vile. Moreover, he said that it wounded his heart, for his methods were beyond comparison with even 1 or 1,000 of hers. Many people shouted that Chelsea was the one who had destroyed them and hated her, so the Dream Creator wanted to show the faces of these people and let them hear the screams, saying that by becoming Chelsea's ally, Ji Yuchuan was only heading toward eternal hatred. Then he invited the boy to come closer and said he could be the one to save him from Chelsea. Ji Yuchuan smiled and said that was a bit of an exaggeration, since every demon who knows Chelsea wants to destroy her, and her popularity in hell is likely off the charts. The girl just told him to shut up, but the Dreammaker smiled contentedly, realizing that these two were simply ignoring him, just like that little child who annoyed him. He was about to destroy them right then and there, calling the boy an idiot because he had missed his chance to leave this world painlessly. However, the protagonist grabbed a scythe and said that if this demon looked down on people from above, he'd better just leave this place, and swung the weapon to strike him down. Literally right after the blow, the dream demon flew apart, parting ways with his head, and they already thought he was finally finished. But in reality, dealing with this demon wasn't quite so simple, and he said he wanted to join the fun. So he invoked the demonic code of curses, which recorded all the attacks this demon had ever seen, though the source of the attack's power still belonged to the demon himself, who wielded it. Ji Yuchuan just sighed heavily, trying to stop him and create a shield. I realized this was yet another annoying creature on his list. He simply had neither the desire nor the time for such entertainment, so together with Chelsea, they began to use their power to get rid of the enemy. The Dreamweaver said there was nothing surprising about this, since, as a follower of Chelsea, only someone like that could and would be capable of such a thing. Using his power, he took the demonic codex and unleashed fire, causing an explosion that sent the protagonist crashing onto his back. His opponent was already ready to destroy him right then and there, lunging at him with a sword, because he wanted to finish the boy off immediately so as not to linger here any longer. But suddenly, Yue, who was already very annoyed, stood before him, saying that he had no right to harm her loved ones, and that she wasn't going to let Ji Yuchuan get away with it. Shortly after, Lu Yao and Ba Yin arrived. saying they would handle the matter and that the others were free to leave. The Dreamweaver merely laughed, seeing that they were all trying to corner him, while Xiana had already aimed her bow at him to shoot the monster. Seagrism also threw a smoke bomb at Xiana without saying a word, implying that the newcomer now had a chance at life, since he had arrived here as her savior and wanted to receive Ji Yuchuan's boundless gratitude. But very soon, neither Sigrism nor anyone else standing there could move at all because the demon had cast yet another spell. Lu Yo realized that this guy was too powerful, and she simply had to get her entire team out of there so that no one else would get hurt. Meanwhile, the Dreamweaver said that time was almost up, and besides, today was a rare full moon, and then he looked up at the sky. He said goodbye to them while they were still unable to move and told them they would see each other again very soon. After the demon disappeared, everyone was able to move again, but Lu Yao wasn't feeling well. Ba Yin began to worry about her, though the girl replied that she had simply been about to use her spatial abilities to evacuate everyone, but the moment they froze had been absolutely terrifying. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan realized that this demon didn't want to destroy them, and since they'd been fighting, the guy hadn't shown even a hint of wanting to destroy them, so for him, that wasn't a good sign. Goozer meanwhile stood nearby and was a little frightened, saying that Chelsea was behaving rather strangely. The girl was literally maniacally obsessed with the idea that they had to destroy this demon at any cost, and find him wherever he was. Zi Yuchuan realized that most likely the demon had done something to Chelsea, which was why she was acting this way, and Lu Yao asked where his contract agreement was, since that would help calm her down. But the guy had no idea what this contract agreement meant, since they had never discussed it at all. Meanwhile, Seagrism followed Chelsea and realized that the guy definitely wanted to attack her, and certainly didn't have time for anything else. Ba Yin said it would be problematic to work with someone who didn't know what a contract agreement was. Moreover, stopping Chelsea without it was practically impossible. The girl, meanwhile, was still furious and insisted that they had to destroy that demon no matter what. And she was extremely aggressive. Seagrism was already ready to pounce on her, thinking she was some kind of crazy woman, and began saying that she didn't even know what she'd have to pay if she wrecked even more of the place. Goozer stood nearby watching his older brother, but became very afraid for him when a very powerful explosion occurred. Of course, he understood that she could have injured him, and being very angry at her, he began to use his powers to attack the girl. But Ji Yuchuan managed to block his blow in time, and Chelsea was not harmed in any way. Guzera and Xiana were surprised that he was still going to defend Chelsea after she had gone mad and was behaving so horribly. The boy simply replied that what was happening with his demons gave no one else the right to judge her or him. The young man tried with all his might to keep her from seeing anything, but she attacked him, so he had to defend himself. Chelsea was truly very angry and told him that he had no right to tell her what to do or how to behave. The girl got so angry that she pushed him away and the boy fell to the ground, realizing he could no longer suppress her mental power. Of course, he understood how her power had grown so much in such a short time. Xiana walked over to him saying that his demon had gotten out of control and that he alone certainly couldn't control her, but Ji Yuchuan ordered them all to get out of there because it was dangerous. After all, they were bound to Chelsea by the power of cosmic laws, and in the worst-case scenario, he could simply be exhausted and do the same to her, so she simply couldn't fight back. And in the end, it was his demon, so he was determined to make sure she woke up. Ji Yuchuan tried absolutely everything to make that happen, but she began to say that anyone who stood in her way would be destroyed immediately. After that, another powerful explosion occurred, and she lifted the car into the air so the others realized it was too dangerous to stay there, and needed to get Seagrism out of there and flee as quickly as possible before it was too late. Lu Yao stepped closer, saying she would transport them all. Besides, everyone had reached their limit, and if they kept going like this, they would definitely pass out. However, the question of what power Ji Yuchuan had obtained still weighed heavily on their minds. The young man was still making an effort, trying to get them to wake up and stop attacking them all so fiercely. Her memories still haunted her, and this was back when she wasn't very old yet. When they were hunting her, she had to just run away, not understanding what was happening. The girl had no idea what was going on, but she was terrified. It became especially frightening when she realized she couldn't escape from there. Suddenly, when she fell, she realized that her head and body had reconnected, but she was so weak that she couldn't even get up to keep running or defend herself. Gathering all her strength, Chelsea managed to get up, realizing that at least she was alive and still had a chance to go back. However, the creature still stood in her way, and having filled a glass with red wine, it tried to bring her back to life, for her next resurrection was supposed to grant them more and more power. Chelsea lay bound and no one was going to release her from these chains. The girl realized that the cycle began again and again, and she kept falling into the same trap. Meanwhile, the Dreammaker approached her with the Codex of Demons, asking if she had been chosen as the sacrifice. He said that her existence was to provide them with an endless supply of blood, and that this time, the blood had to be even better than all the previous times. The girl felt agony that lasted without end, for she was constantly being destroyed and resurrected for their own benefit. Just as one of the demons was about to destroy her again, Ji Yuchuan appeared before her body and shielded her with his barrier. The boy breathed a sigh of relief, realizing how lucky he was that he hadn't been too late and had noticed how bad Chelsea's condition was. The Dreamweaver, meanwhile, looked into the Demon Codex, realizing that Chelsea's fate had been rewritten, and he even felt sad about it. But in any case, he realized that next time she wouldn't be so lucky, since it was just a coincidence that someone had been able to save her. He thought that in order to summon a demon of such a high rank, he would have to gather an incredible number of souls, millions of them. But still, he managed to summon a 6th rank demon named Mordak. Chelsea was lying on the ground and finally opened her eyes. Not recognizing the protagonist, she asked him who he was and if he was also planning to harm her. Ziyu Chuan immediately replied that he didn't want to harm her, after all they were allies, and that he had come here to save her. The young man began explaining that she needed to wake up right away because things would get much worse if she didn't come to her senses. The situation would become much worse if that happened, and the protagonist would have to continue fighting the demon that was trying to harm Chelsea right then and there. He asked if she could hear him and said she needed to wake up immediately, while there was still time to get out of this place. The girl was finally able to wake up, and using his ability, the protagonist managed to pull her out of the state she was stuck in. Chelsea said that it didn't matter at all whether they were allies or not, because she just wanted to end everything that was happening right now. Suddenly, another demon appeared. "I told you that their queen must be reborn endlessly to give them the chance to live on," he said. He also said that anyone who interfered with the ritual would receive the harshest punishment they could possibly devise. But despite this, the protagonist managed to protect her, saying that some time had passed since he had been seriously wounded, and he meant every word. He said that Chelsea had to thank him this time because he had truly saved her life at the cost of his own. Chelsea couldn't hold back her tears as she asked why he had decided to save her, since she was supposed to die as always, and everyone around her should have been happy that this had happened to her again. The girl believed that she herself was the source of all evil, and should be punished for the fact that all these misfortunes were happening precisely because of her. Ziyu Chuan tried again to somehow bring her to her senses and added that if she didn't stop, they would both face grave danger, to the point where they might not survive. He approached her and said, in short, that it wasn't worth staying in this world, which was filled only with suffering, and that they needed to get out of here as soon as possible. Protosila said that the guy was just talking nonsense. And at that very moment, a smile appeared on her face, and Chelsea also said that as the most powerful demoness, like a queen, she would certainly not fall into such a low-level trap of illusion as this one. Meanwhile, Xiana tried to treat Sigrism's wounds in Guzer. Seeing her older brother screaming in pain, she began to comfort him as best she could. Even standing there, Lu Yao could sense the waves of mental energy around them, and a 5th-level expert like Yinji Yu Chuan was also very powerful. After all, she understood that with such abilities, this guy could even reach the SSS level. Meanwhile, they settled back into their own world. He said she could come even closer, but the girl refused, saying she wasn't going to act the way people usually do. After all, she'd done him a favor by teleporting him here, and Ji Yuchuan hadn't even thanked her for what she'd done. Chelsea explained that this was a matter of common courtesy among demons, and was perfectly normal for them. But Bayin, who had been watching all this, said he had never seen anything like it before. Lu Yao immediately approached them, saying that everything was fine for now, but there was no time to relax because headquarters had sent new reports regarding their situation. It turned out that the demon they encountered was not a high-ranking demon, and it had been hiding on Earth since the time before the Red Rain. Its appearance in Dorney was no accident, and had a specific motive. Ba-in said that this predator had been allowed to devour people in this city, so it became interesting to wonder what the demon intended to achieve by sacrificing so many souls. Shana replied that a vast number of souls were needed to resurrect a powerful demon, and perhaps this demon was using the souls to resurrect other demons of the highest rank. Xiana said that the predator claimed to have devoured more than 4 million people. If that's true, then the cursed demon is trying to resurrect someone who will be difficult to deal with. But their newcomer hadn't yet taken possession of the contract's bonds, so if they encountered the cursed demon again, his companions might turn against him. Only then did the protagonist ask what those bonds were. Lu Yao replied that she had decided to split the team into 2 groups and was going to take Xiana and everyone else to deal with the aftermath at this location, and then they started talking about Bayin. He was already delighted, thinking he would have a good task. But the girl said that he would take Ji Yuchuan with him to study the bonds of fate from Master Han Yu and explain how it all works. Eventually, 3 days passed, and they went to the devastated district of Santenberg, where the protagonist asked if this city was the main capital of the people. If so, he didn't understand why they weren't here, to which Ba Yin replied that simply not everyone had the resources to live in the central district. The protagonist thought it was because if the city were attacked, the residents of the public district could not only warn others but also buy time. That's why those in high places like to call the citizens signalers, and once again noted that humans were very different from demons. Then she stopped Ba-in, asking whether they would really be learning these customs of the agreement from the signalers. But the man replied that Teacher Han Yu is not a signaler. He simply disagrees with the practices of those who live inside. Eventually, the Bells ended up in a house that looked like it had been abandoned long ago. But Ba-in announced that their teacher lived there and they needed to go inside. Suddenly, Ji Yu Chuan hadn't even had time to come to his senses and do anything when he was immediately grabbed by giant tentacles, leaving him no chance of escaping. Ba Yin didn't look scared at all and said it was good that the teacher's target was only them, and that everything would definitely be fine now. He started shouting that the teacher could at least take Ji Yu Chuan's shoes, but shouldn't touch him any further. Meanwhile, in the same city near the entrance to these caves where the stones were being extracted, there were a lot of people waiting to get at least some information. Xian Na and Lu Yao were also there, and the girl said that this was an unauthorized cave using prisoners from the city as labor, without a contract with the Alliance, so this covert operation had been going on for a long time. But then the boss asked for information about the survivors from the prison, to which her subordinate replied that they had been rescued. Lu Yo realized that this wasn't just an illegal operation for profit, and began to wonder if there might be a traitor within their alliance. The boss ordered them to ensure the survivors were under protection, as they might be crucial witnesses for their case. She also ordered Xiana to gather absolutely all the information they currently had, since they needed to report everything that had happened here to the president. Ba Yin was already sitting at the table next to Mei Mei and asked if they could avoid using those dirty tricks during training next time, but the girl replied unhappily that she had tried to do so. Mei Mei added that besides, Grandpa had said that in battle, one must target the opponent's weak spots, which is exactly what she had done, though Ba Yin hadn't expected to hear anything like that from her. Suddenly, something exploded, and the teacher started getting angry that he was talking about him like that. But Ba Yin added that the teacher shouldn't get distracted from training, since Ji Yuchun himself and his demon were no easy opponents. Han Yu realized that Ba Yin was actually getting stronger every day, and eventually he might even become stronger than his teacher. He also thought that, as he'd heard, Ji Yu Chuan had an S-rank mental level, and he simply hoped that this guy and his demon could hold out a little longer, since that would make this boring life at least a little more interesting. A special space where it was impossible to use abilities felt like a crime, but they were shoved right into it just as they were trying to find a way out. Then he turned to Chelsea again, seeing that the box had reappeared in the same spot, and it said, "Open it right now." The girl was annoyed, saying that she was really fed up with it, but the main character suggested they just take it one step at a time without turning back. Chelsea walked on and saw another box. She asked if it was one of those surprise boxes mentioned on the sign by the entrance. To her, it looked completely ordinary, so she decided to open it, despite the fact that Ji Yuchuan ran over to stop her. She thought he was just being scared, and he replied that there might actually be a trap inside. The girl said that even if that were the case, if he was always so cautious, they would never get out of there at all. But when she opened the box, there was almost nothing inside, and it just exploded, which made the girl angry because she hadn't seen anything. However, after that, something jumped out and started laughing. Some clowns jumped out of there who called themselves the spirits of the boxes and greeted them, basically saying that there were 20 boxes hidden in the maze, 15 of which had debuffs. The first one to collect 10 cards with debuffs would be able to stay here forever with them, and if they found the single key hidden in all the boxes, they would be able to get through the maze and leave them behind, which made these two spirits incredibly upset. One of them was very happy that they would be able to stay with them, and started begging them to stay, while the other started yelling at them to get out of there immediately. Chelsea asked what he thought they should do in that case, and he suggested opening absolutely all the boxes. She asked if he wanted to weaken the queen that way, but the boy replied that they simply didn't know what other dangers awaited them in these places. And since she had already taken a hit, he needed to at least protect one of them and keep their full combat strength within safe limits. Finding the key would be the best option. If that didn't work, the next step would be to open all the remaining boxes to minimize the risks. He added that if their roles were reversed, he would make the same choice. It turned out she had simply chained them together. They say that no matter what happens, he must ensure her safety in any case. When something went wrong, it started to dawn on him that he was simply a terrible person if he dared to behave this way toward her right now. Every box here had a debuff, and this person wasn't going to let them leave this place. And the protagonist figured that Chelsea had already opened 9 boxes, so he couldn't let her open the next one. That's exactly why the guy stepped closer and opened the next box, seeing a dagger inside, and after that he fell silent. She asked why he was silent and wasn't saying anything, also asking what he had found. As expected, he just wanted to play with her, and then Chelsea said they should keep moving forward. Maybe there was another box ahead, and ordered him to keep going so they could finally find that key and get out of this horrible place. After a while, Ji Yuchuan stopped when they reached another dead end with a box, and Chelsea asked why he was standing there. Ji Yuchuan stepped closer and saw a note there along with a key attached to it, which meant they would be able to get out of this place. Finally, he said he'd found the key, and Chelsea moved closer, saying they needed to leave this dreadful place as soon as possible, because she was sick of being here. Suddenly, the same spirits appeared and began congratulating them on having made it through the maze, but that wasn't the end of it. They explained that to escape for good, they'd have to play truth or dare, and only then might they be able to get out. Han Yu watched everything that was happening there and thought that things were only getting more interesting, so he continued to watch what was going on. One of the spirits said they would draw cards, and as long as they answered the questions honestly, he would remove the debuffs. He also began to talk about what would happen if they lied to him, saying that something terrible would occur. She said that unfortunately she had nothing to hide, so she told them to ask their questions quickly and finally restore her sight. Eventually, he asked if she wanted to take over Ji Yuchuan's body, and the girl said that she had wanted to before, but now he was a part of her, so naturally she would protect him no matter what. The spirit said that this was very sincere and sentimental, but Chelsea ordered him to shut up and quickly remove the debuff from her since she had answered truthfully. He told her not to be so impatient since her partner still hadn't answered the question, and Ji Yuchun finally said they should end this game. Then the guy reached for the cards, and there was a question asking if, after entering the maze, he had lied to his partner. Ji Yuchuan replied that, according to the principle of communication, he really hadn't lied. She didn't understand what this principle of communication was at all. She started thinking that it was some kind of human law she didn't know about. Ji Yuchuan decided to give an example and said that if he had 7 candies in his bag and Chelsea asked how many he had, it would be rude to tell her he only had 1 or 2. And that's what they call the principle of communication. Keeping some things to yourself isn't quite the same as lying about them to someone. And although the spirit didn't quite understand what the guy was talking about, she realized it wasn't worth arguing. But then he said that in the end they judge each other themselves, so he wasn't going to interfere in these matters. Just as promised, Chelsea's sight returned, and the spirit said that her partner had been up to something for nearly a few years, and his little secrets were the items he'd hidden from her while she was blinded, so he asked if Chelsea would forgive him. The contracts didn't work as written on that card, and there was also something mentioned about a raincoat in Ji Yuchuan. He thought about how he hadn't wanted to tell her because of her stubborn nature. He stepped closer, saying that while Chelsea couldn't see and was weakened, it would have been worse if she'd found out the contract wasn't working. But the girl said there was no need to say more since their top priority was simply to get out of there as quickly as possible. She approached the spirit, saying that the queen had decided this guy wasn't lying, so she declared that they needed to finish this level right now, and the spirit agreed. He added that Vitaly had successfully completed this level, and now they could move on to find a way out. After that, a door appeared before them. There were 3 of them. So the spirit said that there was only one real door to life, and which one was truly real depended solely on how they used their wisdom. The protagonist realized that these doors looked exactly the same from the outside and that perhaps the real danger was hidden behind one of them, while Chelsea, after trying to sense something magically, replied that she felt absolutely nothing. The girl suggested that everyone choose one door and the best one would win, even though the protagonist tried to stop her. Ji Yuchuan was actually impressed that it was possible to defeat someone without using any force, and they had already fallen into a trap on the first level, so the designer had planned to hide things to avoid trouble, and that was exactly what became a minefield for Chelsea. He told her that they really didn't understand each other very well, especially as partners, so they should work on that. But in the end, the girl had already entered a door where she was met by spirits, who said that the only being you can trust is yourself. A lie, meaning he didn't trust Chelsea. But on the other hand, Chelsea really did trust him. So no one can understand this girl. No one knows who she really is, and he began to call her simply a terrible demon when other demons had exploited her. She completely ignored them, telling them they'd said enough and not to bother her, because she just wanted to end it all and get out of there. But eventually, a monster attacked her, and the girl turned around to attack it and defend herself. The designer of this trial really knows how to piss her off, and the girl understood that perfectly well. It was as if she was being told those same words again, that she shouldn't be so impatient, and perhaps her partner was thinking exactly the same thing right now. Meanwhile, Liu Yao went to the president and reported that resolving the crisis in Dorney was thanks to a newcomer from the demonic team named Ji Yuchuan, so he hoped to officially accept him into Heaven's Wrath. The director said that this guy had done quite a bit outside the scope of the Expert Control Center, so Liu Bintian didn't know if they could trust him on this matter. The girl said that their interests aligned at the moment, and he wasn't stupid enough to break a mutually beneficial partnership for some small gain. If they used him correctly, this guy could become their best weapon. Liu Bintian asked if that would really work, and then inquired about the demon that had gone out of control in that city. Liu Yao reported that she had arranged for him to train with Han Yu, so that such incidents wouldn't happen again in the future. To get through this stage, he would have to defeat the Chelsea replicants before his strength finally abandoned him. But all the boy had were the items he'd retrieved from the labyrinth, so he realized that everything had actually been rigged for this situation. Ji Yuchuan grabbed the dagger, realizing that the time had come to rely solely on this cloak of mist and the cursed dagger, a single strike of which could be fatal. But suddenly, a copy of Chelsea appeared and instantly struck him, piercing him with her chain. Despite the fact that the wound was quite severe and the boy was already quite exhausted, he still didn't give up and instantly found himself behind Chelsea. When it was all over, the real Chelsea suddenly approached him, saying she hadn't even thought the boy would manage to defeat her copies, and they were already preparing to pick him up off the floor and carry him home. Then she added that despite her wounds, they needed to move on, and she didn't want to talk so much or waste time on all this. But suddenly another fight broke out, and it would take an eternity to find a weak spot, since Ji Yuchuan was too cautious. Suddenly, another earthquake began and they, along with Chelsea, were terrified, realizing that the building was simply collapsing before their eyes. But when Han Yu appeared there, the building stopped collapsing, and the teacher congratulated them on successfully navigating the labyrinth of the soul. Suddenly, the very same soul demon appeared behind him. They could now proceed to the next stage of testing and training. The teacher explained that they had to survive for 10 minutes. Once they were immersed in this vortex of demonic energy, and their contractual bonds would be formed. So the man asked if they were ready to try right now. Since the two of them had come here for this very purpose, they agreed, and the spirit began to create that same vortex, preparing to see what they were capable of. When it all began, the teacher noticed that the snake had emerged from that exit, and Han Yu thought that they had already suffered defeat and lost. But at that moment, the protagonist managed to decide to join forces in order to have more strength. If these two were brought together with all their hidden motives, they could never truly trust each other completely. The teacher could also clearly sense the incredibly intense mental energy emanating from the two of them. He found it. Immediately after that, the protagonist lunged at the teacher with blows, and a battle ensued. Han Yu began fighting him, striking him hard in the stomach and saying that it was very rude to sneak up on an old man like that. He began to use the power of the 12 forms, a martial art he had created himself, which combined the 5 elements and the 8 trigrams with raw mental energy. Meanwhile, Ba Yin and Mei Mei went to the store to buy groceries, and he asked why she shouldn't make a prediction for Ji Yuchuan and what would happen there, and of course, the girl agreed. In a matter of seconds, she had the prediction and said that while swimming in a calm blue spring, the fish doesn't notice the net closing in from all sides. Ba Yin simply replied that the prediction was terrible and that she should probably step in to teach him a good lesson. But the girl replied that perhaps the master had been away for so long because this newcomer was tougher than they all thought. In any case, the Maze of Souls was just an appetizer, and facing the master's full strength actually shatters bones, for this martial art is truly terrifying. They did indeed continue to fight on equal terms, but the master said that Chelsea and Ji Yuchuan's impatience would cost them dearly right now. Of course, they were doing pretty well, but he was still just a novice, and even though the boy managed to land a blow, the master still managed to emerge victorious from this battle. After a while, he turned back and saw the boy just lying on the ground, and realized that he would most likely have to teach them next time. Of course, this was a new experience, but they didn't trust him or each other at all. Yet, they were bound as a demon and a contractor, so that trust was incredibly important. Meanwhile, the Dreamweaver arrived before the king, who said that Mordak's power had not fully receded after all, since the sacrifice had been insufficient. And the Dreamweaver replied that his ward was indeed to blame for this, so he asked for punishment for himself. The demon said that the Dreamweaver had served him for millennia and could not treat the fulfillment of his duties this way. He also said that the Dreamweaver had seen Chelsea and began asking what had become of the girl. So the Dreamweaver explained that she had entered into a contract with a weak human, and her powers were only a tenth of what they had been before. In the end, the demon said he forgave him for the failure in Dorna, but told him not to disappoint him this time, and the Dreamweaver thanked his master for forgiving him. The king also told him to arrange a meeting with Mordak right away, since it was time to move on to the next part of their plan. He simply couldn't wait to see the look on his face when they finally met again, after such a long separation. Ba Yin, meanwhile, said he'd forgotten to tell Ji Yuchuan that he'd be cursed with a debuff after visiting the teacher's spiritual realm, so he needed to be careful in the real world as well. The protagonist was furious because, after 3 whole days, he was only telling him this now, so the guy didn't even know if it was done on purpose or by accident. Just 3 days ago, as he had suspected, the underground demon research lab was protected by a high security zone, and he would need a new plan to uncover the connection between the Wrath of the Heavens and the Blaze organization. Suddenly, as they entered another store, Chelsea turned to him, saying that Guzer was pathetic and had never had a chance of defeating her from the very beginning. As she moved closer, she accidentally splattered the boy with ice cream. The girl was very disappointed because her ice cream was now on her clothes, and she wouldn't be able to eat it. After that, 2 more scoops of ice cream fell on him, landing right on his head, and Chelsea turned away and laughed, not even realizing how she could have done such a thing, but added that she would clean it up herself. The girl began to cast a water spell, but ice came out instead, and Ji Yuchuan simply didn't know if she was doing it on purpose, or if it was just an accident. He looked at her, asking if she could melt that piece of ice just for him, but Ji Yuchuan just told her to finally back off so she wouldn't make things worse. When they finally returned to the building, he realized he was incredibly cold and hoped that at least a hot bath might help somehow. He had simply gone into the bathhouse to relax just a little, but hadn't paid attention to where the women's and men's saunas were located. Meanwhile, Lu Yao and Xia Na were already there to relax, and Xia Na asked Lu Yao why they had come to the bathhouse so late. Lu Yao replied that there had been a lot on her plate lately, and she just needed to unwind. Besides, it had been crowded earlier, and Xia Na would likely have felt out of place. Lu Yao thought the hot springs here were special, and they decided they should bring Ba Ying here tomorrow so he could relax too, since everyone needs a break when they work so hard. The girl also wondered if Ji Yuchuan, Chelsea, would pass the teacher's test and how it would all turn out. Lu Yao thought she was worried about Ji Yuchuan, but Xiana started making excuses, saying she was just worried that he wouldn't be able to help them and would somehow slow down their mission. Suddenly, they heard a strange sound, and Xiana immediately began to worry that it was one of those creatures she had read about that could hide in the water. Lu Yao stood up and said there was no need to worry since it was most likely just someone's towel or something like that, though they were both anxious, not knowing what was there. Only when they suddenly saw Ji Yuchuan emerge from there did they scream, not understanding what was happening, though the protagonist himself didn't even know what to say and felt awkward. He knew any explanation would sound lame, but he asked if they wanted to hear at least some kind of excuse. After that, it took him a full 2 days to sort through all those documents of divine wrath, and it turned out to be much more complicated than the expert control center. But Lu Yao didn't care at all how long it would take or how difficult it was for him. She had simply ordered him to complete the task. And while the guy was sorting through these documents, he couldn't even imagine that he'd come across something interesting. After all, there was some lab equipment they'd bought in Troya, and the dean was hiding in the church without a trace. So the guy thought that Troya and Blaze were indeed somehow connected. But he had other problems too, since his training with Hein Yu never stopped, and they kept training on. Despite the fact that the professor himself was very strong, he began to notice that Ji Yuchuan had the ability to copy his Step of Emptiness technique. The young man finally stopped and said that the Dreamweaver never forgets an expert's energy mistake, and he had been waiting for him from the moment he entered the city. Finally, the professor stopped, saying that the boy wasn't very cunning, though he didn't even resemble his parents, but Ji Yuchuan was surprised, not understanding how this man could know his parents. Han Yu simply replied that he would explain this only once the professor had secured the contract, but for now he needed to summon his demon, because someone was waiting for them in the training hall. Before long, they arrived at the training hall where Bella and Sigrism were waiting for them to finally begin the duel the young man had mentioned earlier. A short while later, the protagonist arrived at the hall, and Sigrism, without even waiting, began attacking him the moment the boy least expected it. Sigrism started laughing, saying that the boy was incapable of anything. Ji Yuchuan realized that even if he was wounded, even if it was a vital spot, the wounds healed instantly, so it became clear that this was the very power of the immortal demon. Chelsea told him that the guy they were about to fight was much stronger than he thought, so she told him to hand over control to her, but Ji Yuchuan replied that he would handle it himself. Sigrism thought he was going to keep his distance and play it safe, but she just kept saying that their opponent shouldn't be underestimated. The first one started saying that, as a mental master, Ji Yuchuan must be sick of constantly thinking that others are idiots incapable of anything. Sigrism added that he had nowhere left to run, so it would be better for this guy to just start begging for help and mercy. Vichila began to say that something was definitely wrong with that guy, since he was ready to simply destroy them. And Ji Yuchuan realized that now the Dreammaker could peer into his memories as well. Sigrism continued to scream, saying he would destroy him right now. He was simply out of control, thinking that a true warrior never retreats, and these memories were also tied to his childhood. Lu Yao, meanwhile, came to the master, asking how things were going with the others in the training hall, and Han Yu said that everything was already over. The girl asked if Sigrism had managed to win using his power against the demon, but Han Yu replied that the boy had lost, which, of course, surprised her greatly. Bella was worried about Sigrism, asking what had happened to him, and if he was badly hurt. Moreover, she tried to stop the boy, saying that it was just training. Lu Yao and the master walked ahead, and the girl said that if this continued, his mind would break. However, the teacher replied that unless he faced the shadows of his past, he would never become stronger. Besides, Ji Yuchuan's talent and abilities hadn't fully manifested yet, so they wanted to watch a little longer. After all, finding someone like him was like finding a treasure. The protagonist now began to understand what was happening and saw Sigrism's memories. He grew up in the Bone Tribe in a clan of warriors, and a man approached him saying that with that level of training, he would definitely never become stronger, and that he needed to try harder. Then he approached the boy, saying that his aunt had prepared something delicious and they wouldn't be able to eat that evening, so he invited him to come over for dinner. They were blessed warriors from the moment of their birth, and according to the rules, the end of life is no different from the time you are alive. Family was the most important thing to them and stood above everything else. They were loyal to one another until the moment they left this world, and these principles have sustained the tribe for many generations. But disaster struck them all the same, and it happened very quickly, for monsters arrived and began destroying everything there. At that moment, every member of the tribe attacked the creature to protect their loved ones. Although there were many of them, they were weaker than this monster, so eventually it destroyed absolutely everyone in Sigrism, leaving him alone amidst a pile of bodies. The boy began to run, realizing he had to escape. He didn't want to die at the hands of the demon, so he rushed away as fast as he could. But then he saw his brother, who had started running toward the monster, intending to destroy it with a simple dagger, for he wanted to avenge what this creature had done to their mother. However, of course, he was no match for this demon, and the creature grabbing the boy began to say that the same thing was happening over and over again. Seagrism kept remembering everything that had happened back then and shouted that he would destroy whoever had harmed him. Meanwhile, Bella was told in short that his contract wasn't going through, and that when Seagrism lost control, she had to do at least something to stop it. But it turned out that wasn't the case. Bella began to say that it was the contractor Chelsea who had corrupted Seagrism's memories, and that it was his fault. Therefore, Chelsea and Ji Yuchuan couldn't even create the necessary contract, so she didn't consider them worthy of judging anyone else. Seagrism was completely out of his mind and continued to try to do everything he could to destroy his rival. Guilt and anger were evident in him. Then when Bella met him, she asked if he wanted to sign a contract with her. She asked how long he had been wandering these lands and assured him that a contract was exactly what he needed. Liu Yao saw the last survivor of the Bone Tribe and also offered him to join them. The girl also brought along another young boy, saying that he had been rescued during the operation and that his former captors had taken his eyes, so Guzera needed someone to watch over them for a while. Seagrism gladly agreed and, after stating his name, said he would protect Guzera from that moment on, and thus he knew he had to become stronger. He wanted to be more powerful so that no one could ever take away what was truly important to him again. He began to gradually transform into a demon, calling out his name, and said that even if he had to become a different creature, he would still fight. Seagrism said that he would never back down from what he needed, and then began to laugh, saying it was time to finish this. Ji Yuchuan didn't back down either, and together with Chelsea, they fought. So the protagonist said that now was their time to win and stop him. Immediately after that, they bound Seagrism with chains. Stronger demons can subjugate weaker ones, preventing them from moving, and they can also temporarily use part of their subordinate's power. After a while, Liu Yao entered with the teacher, and they stopped both of them, declaring that the battle was over and that Ji Yuchuan would be the victor. She began to say that there were still no signs that their contract had ended, and all the queen's efforts had been in vain. Bella started saying that Ji Yuchuan had no moves left, and then began shouting that the training was over, very worried about Seagrism. The boy himself said that his opinion of Ji Yuchuan hadn't changed, and that he was still the person he hated. And now that he had lost, he was even more disappointed, but ultimately, his goal hadn't been Ji Yuchuan himself. He had fled his tribe out of fear, but now he felt absolutely nothing except regret, and considered it a sin he would carry with him until the end of his days. But since they had taken his loved ones from him, he wanted to make him pay for what had happened back then. At the same time, Ji Yuchuan's words greatly surprised the boys, for he simply held out his hand to him, saying that Seagrism must defeat the one who took him and prove to himself that he is not weak, for the spirit of the Bone Tribe still flows in his blood. Meanwhile, a new report was submitted to headquarters stating that they had seen a predator as well as a demon, and one of the workers was requesting reinforcements, having almost run out of strength. Mordak stood before him, asking if this boy was the leader, and continued to torment him, showing no intention of letting him go. The demon said, "I want to look at him," and added that this might be a blessing for the guy, since his face would be the last thing this man would ever see. Mordak was now thinking about Chelsea, as he wanted to settle the score with her and prove that she wasn't the strongest of all the demons. Ji Yuchuan, along with her students, was lying in bed at the time, though she had returned to her previous form right in her sleep, since she had previously been in a serpentine form. Meanwhile, when the boy got up, he saw the shadows and grabbed them using his power, and after that, screams were heard behind the door. Immediately after that, he decided to go out and check what was happening and saw Xiana and Guzera in front of him, who had arranged a surprise for him and showered the boy with confetti. Xiana said that since the mission in Dorney had been successfully completed, her boss had decided to throw a banquet, and Guzera announced that everyone was waiting for Ji Yuchuan and that they should hurry while there were still some treats left. Soon they arrived at the hall where the banquet was taking place, and there was plenty of light, food, and a variety of music. Liu Yao stepped out onto the veranda, taking 2 bottles of beer with her, and realizing she hadn't had such a wonderful drink in a long time, paid absolutely no attention to the fact that someone was looking for her. Ji Yuchuan was sitting at the bar with the others, and Ba Yin asked if he was drunk since he'd already had quite a bit to drink. At that moment, Seagrism realized that he had previously thought Ji Yuchuan was genuine, but now he saw that he was a true warrior and was genuinely grateful that he had pulled him out of those terrible memories. Ji Yuchuan then asked Ba Yin why he wasn't drinking, and the boy replied that he preferred milk to alcohol, so he didn't want to drink. Seagrism simply praised him, but then Ji Yuchuan poured milk into his glass, despite Ba Yin's desperate attempts to stop him. Ji Yuchuan replied that Ba Yin should trust him, that a little milk makes the alcohol much milder, even though Ba Yin had already said earlier that he doesn't drink at all. Meanwhile, Bella noticed that Seagrism was completely drunk and needed help, but Chelsea stopped her, saying that she had no idea how to cook on the grill. Just then, Liu Yao and Xiana arrived, and the boss, who was also completely drunk, said she was a pretty good cook and would handle everything herself, even though she had already been told to stop drinking. In the end, Xiana left the grill to Chelsea, and she did her best to salvage whatever was left and carried everything that remained on a plate. But unexpectedly, as the girl walked by, she saw Ji Yuchuan lying on the ground, and she thought he was dead, but then he replied in a voice that he was fine. Chelsea laughed and said she hadn't expected to see him in such a state after just a few drinks. But when he suddenly, albeit slowly, began to get up, she added that she hoped she hadn't made a mistake by signing a contract with someone as weak as him. She was also curious to see what the full-fledged contract they'd been discussing would look like. The man replied that on the day they found themselves in Han Yu's demonic energy, he heard a demonic voice literally out of nowhere. The protagonist didn't remember what those voices were saying because everything was in chaos, and he was only thinking about how to banish all of it from his mind, since there were too many intrusive thoughts. People began to say that this was his drunken way of apologizing to the queen for that terrible day, but Ji Yuchuan denied it, saying that wasn't the case because he really did have thoughts about it. The first condition for concluding these contracts might indeed exist between them, but he asked what the girl thought about it. In fact, she was very surprised when he directly asked her what she thought about it. But suddenly they were distracted by Xia Na, who looked ahead anxiously, saying that she had been telling her boss the whole time that they didn't need to drink anymore, but the boss hadn't listened to her. Lu Yao was now standing there with a plate of grilled meat and started yelling that they couldn't not eat it, since she had gone to all that trouble for them. Besides, wasting food was a crime in her eyes, so she would just throw them in jail. But soon enough, all the fun came to an end because they were informed that someone had attacked the Heaven's Wrath base, and they urgently needed to do something. The Index Demon, who held the 36th rank, was on the list of cowards. But despite this, the demon still tried to speak, asking a man if he was indeed the captain, and he replied that his name was Mordak, and added that he needed help. Oshia immediately took this to heart, but she was surprised that he knew her name. Nevertheless, she replied that while she could help, she was very timid and not particularly strong. Mordak simply replied that once she entered her true form, people would be even more important than she was, so he wanted to take her with him and prove that she could do more. Lu Yao understood everything in her own way. Meanwhile, they arrived at the scene and were informed that they were still investigating the situation, but there were no signs of a breach because the main gates had been opened in safe mode. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan remarked that if the gates were open and undamaged, it could be an intrusion. But very suddenly, while they were discussing the whole situation, one of the staff members shouted that they had found the one who hadn't done any of this, and it turned out to be the captain of Heaven's Wrath. Of course, none of those standing there believed for a moment that this could be true, since every member of Heaven's Wrath undergoes strict vetting, so it was unlikely that he could be a demonic contractor working from within all this time. But it was the only logical explanation. Sigrism immediately rushed forward, saying that he didn't care who the traitor was, he just wanted to deal with him. At that moment, Zi Yuchuan remained calm, pondering what might be the case, and began to suspect that the traitor himself might be a demon. The incubation chambers were made of purified stone, which was bound by roots that restrained its power, and they were personally inscribed by the president, so it was unlikely they could be destroyed so easily. At that moment, Vuchi said she sensed something familiar yet dangerous, and perhaps they should be more cautious, as they would have to face something far worse than any demon they had encountered before. Immediately after that, the team stepped back, realizing that this was the place where their organization's sealed demons were kept. They all moved forward, realizing that they were all high-ranking members, so no one knew how this could have happened. Xiana simply replied that it was incredibly terrible. They couldn't let whoever did this just get away and continue causing chaos. Meanwhile, as they went further, they saw Sigrism hanging from above, struggling with all his might to get out, though he couldn't manage it at all. He told Bella to get out of there as quickly as possible since her power was waning, but the girl said she couldn't do it. At the same time, Guzera decided to help his older brother, despite Ji Yuchuan's attempts to stop him, telling him not to release the demon first. Lu Yo realized that this creature had also taken possession of Guzera's demon, so they couldn't control what was happening at all, and the girl simply told everyone to stay away. However, upon cautiously stepping closer, it turned out there was still a sufficient amount of mental energy left, and they might be able to find something useful amidst all this. Before long, something did indeed begin to happen, and a skeleton appeared, addressing them to welcome them to the start of the battle, adding that the message was completely imbued with the elegance of combat. He said that his master would launch a full-scale attack on Sentenberg tomorrow at dawn, and every soul within its walls would be destroyed. His master also told him to convey that if Chelsea could make it to Lost Paradise, the attack would be called off or postponed, so he figured that wasn't the worst option. Ji Yuchuan now realized that the guy was her old friend and he was hunting her, even though Chelsea said she wasn't sure about it. I want to feel some strange, familiar attack, but if I'm not mistaken, their Heaven's Wrath squad won't be able to stand up to him. I'll say it again, this entire message is filled with the elegance of battle. Lu Yao ordered Xia Na to finally shut him up because he was getting on her nerves. The commander also issued an order. A level 1 alert was declared throughout the city, and all units must report any demon movements as soon as possible, as well as who they will target. If necessary, permission was granted to use Heavenly Wrath weapons without exception. and lethal force was authorized. Guzer thought the captain was about to start a war. Ba Yin added that they didn't even know who they were dealing with, because if it was just one person, activating the Heavenly Wrath protocol might seem too radical right now. Lu Yao simply said that the city's strongest espers and demon constructors were on the Heavenly Wrath roster. And even if Seagrism and Guzera had survived those traps, not to mention that this creature had taken a high-ranking demon, that was precisely why they needed to know just how dangerous this creature could be. It turned out that she wants Chelsea to go out to meet them so they can buy time or delay them. Ba Yin and Sigrism were firmly against it, saying that this is exactly what the enemy wants, and there's definitely a trap there, so the situation could get even worse. Guzer added that the attack on the city is clearly an attempt to force them to hand over Chelsea, so this really isn't the best option. Ji Chuan said that if that's really the case, they should do as he wants, and Chelsea herself said she decided to go out to meet them, so they'll do as planned. Lu Yao asked them not to be too reckless and to think everything through down to the smallest details, and the protagonist replied that this is something Chelsea and he himself must face, since the others were simply dragged into this by accident. Suddenly, she got a call and they immediately started asking about Ji Chuan. The girl replied that he had just left, but they told her to bring him in immediately because he was the one they were looking for. The president began to say that others might not know, but she had no right to let him go on such a mission alone because it was too dangerous. Lu Yao was told that this was definitely her fault, but she thinks that what's more important this time is that they have a traitor. However, the president informed her that he had already been notified of this. The Heavenly Wrath base had never been attacked so fiercely before, so of course they needed to be cautious. But the Heavenly Wrath weapon must be used with care, and this young man's power is immense. Since the Red Rain disaster, technological progress has stalled, so they can no longer produce more of these weapons, and they should only be used as a last resort. He admitted that he had summoned her here for a more important matter. The president reported that the latest research results from their doctors were there. There was information about Ji Chuan, and it was stated that it could be compared to Ji Chuan's DNA alongside the DNA of the first predators, and that he is genetically closer to a predator than to a human. Lu Yao said that the first predators appeared more than 2 decades ago, and Ji Chuan was just a small child back then, so she thought this must be some kind of mistake. The president said that she could doubt the doctors as much as she wanted, but the research was definitely accurate, so he simply hoped that Ji Chuan would at least be able to bring hope to this world. The girl began to panic even more because in that case, this traitor might be looking for Ji Chuan specifically if he also knew all these research results. The man replied that this was definitely impossible since these studies were kept under their strictest security, but there had always been suspicions regarding the origin of the contract with the demon, which Lu Yao had constantly mentioned. He told her to take it and use it if Chelsea became a threat to Ji Chuan, and then handed her an object. It turned out to be a space-time demonic hammer, and it could be used because it had been modified by the visual core. Now it was imbued with the abilities of many high-level espers, and with its help, the demonic contract could be severed. Lu Yao said that even if Ji Chuan hadn't fully taken control of his contract yet, they wouldn't have to worry if Chelsea lost control, but the president said that unfortunately, the hammer could only be used once, so they should think about when the best moment would be. He approached her, to which the girl replied that she would handle it carefully and think before acting. However, the man trusted her completely and was confident that she would do the right thing. Her mother's dying wish was indeed important, but she was his daughter and even more important. Meanwhile, Ji Chuan and Chelsea headed to where they had been directed, and the girl asked if this was the same plan he had mentioned. After all, draining all his mental energy so she could face this creature one-on-one wasn't the best option. The guy replied that it was better than blindly walking into the monster's trap, and suggested to wait until it came out, since that way their chances would be much higher. This creature had challenged them, and as long as they stayed there, it would definitely come out before dawn to destroy the city. After all, the demon had stated this itself right in front of them. Chelsea noted that Ji Chuan's mental energy was incredible, and that he might one day become even stronger than her, though she had a feeling that something was off, and that she was overlooking something important. The boy smiled and said she shouldn't worry because she wouldn't be alone, and he wouldn't do anything rash. All he needed to do was help her regain her memories along with her power. Suddenly something happened, and the boy simply collapsed, but he told her to be very careful of her surroundings when the battle began. He said that his mental energy was under attack, so he didn't know for sure how it would end. Monsters suddenly appeared, but Chelsea, without losing her composure, began attacking them, determined to get rid of those creatures. The girl didn't understand what was happening at all because usually these creatures were supposed to just vanish from her attacks, so it seemed to her that her power had simply weakened. But soon Chelsea realized that wasn't the case, and she began to feel afraid as she watched what was happening around her. Meanwhile, Oshia and Mordak watched what was happening, and she asked if it was okay to destroy them, since her mom had told her not to destroy anyone and that doing so might get her in trouble. However, Mordak replied that everything was fine, because she shouldn't suppress her nature after all. Humans have something similar too, and she would simply be a bit of an unusual person. Oshia said she understood everything and would be a good person to thank him, and Mordak said she was already doing quite well and he was proud of her. Mordak said all this because with such a destructive nature and powerful abilities, she was certainly capable of much more. He even considered that Osh might even help Chelsea, and that would be the perfect idea to finally face her in battle and win. Meanwhile, the girl herself stood in the field among these walking dead, but the protagonist was finally able to get to his feet, though he was incredibly exhausted after the attack on his mental energy. Chelsea was growing weaker, and this fear she kept talking about was the work of a high-ranking demon, but he didn't sense its presence at all, as if completely absorbed in the moment. He said that the more she fought those creatures, the weaker she became, but the girl replied that it felt as though something had been affecting her all this time. Only then did that same demon appear, addressing the student and saying that they hadn't seen each other in a long time, but since their last meeting she had become significantly weaker than she had been then. Then he began to lunge at her, saying that she had made a deal with such a pathetic human, and that it seemed just as ridiculous to him as it would to such a powerful former demon queen. After that he pushed her away, but the protagonist asked if she was okay and if she was hurt, even though there was already blood on her face. Ji Yu-chuan didn't wait another minute and lunged at the demon, though the demon began to laugh, saying that the boy couldn't hide from him and that he would always find him. However, the protagonist had no intention of hiding from him, destroying all the monsters that attacked them and continuing to fight on and on. Ji Yu-chuan realized that all he needed to do was destroy this demon, and he would be one step closer to the truth he so desperately wanted to uncover. Suddenly he was attacked again, but the boy quickly created a shield that protected him from the blow. However, he realized that he had slowed down significantly, much to his own surprise. The demon began to laugh, saying that this whole performance was very boring, and he found it strange that this was all Ji Yu-chuan was capable of. Then he began to use the judge skill, which was one of the abilities of the path to victory. It slows down the very fabric of space and time around enemies while leaving the user untouched. He began to say that the other had to come out and look him in the eye, and he also called Chelsea over and said he wanted to really take a good look at her and feel what it would be like to be stronger than her. Mordak could already literally taste victory and was incredibly happy that everything was going according to his plan. He was waiting for the moment when Chelsea would finally fall and hoped she would really enjoy the little surprise he had prepared for her at the end. Meanwhile, the others had also arrived at the scene to find Ji Yu-chuan, but upon arriving there, they were surprised to see what the boy had done with his demon. Guzer asked where the boy was, and his thoughts weren't exactly optimistic, but Sigrism replied that this boy had once defeated him, so Ji Yu-chuan wasn't someone to be taken lightly, and breaking him wouldn't be easy either. Their boss simply said they couldn't linger and needed to split up to finally find at least someone to explain the situation to. Xiaona and Ba Yin, you go with her, and the two brothers should go in from the other side, since their priority is to find Ji Yu-chuan and his demon. Meanwhile, the guys were already inside some kind of cave, and they thought that this lunatic had dragged them into some other dimension. And the guy agreed, saying he didn't sense any other life forms here besides themselves. Suddenly, they saw something emerge from the water, and the demon began to say that he had been watching them for a very long time, and as a result, their strength began to wane more and more, and their reflexes also deteriorated significantly. Immediately after that, the demon emerged from the water holding his skull-shaped weapon, and now the victory demon was in his full form, having appeared in his own dimension. He began attacking them, but the protagonist still managed to protect himself and Chelsea from the blow. He said that this demon was very powerful and Chelsea was too weak, so she needed to step aside and let him deal with this creature on his own. Looking at all this, it was clear that this was definitely Mordak, the demon of victory, and she recognized him by all those markings. Immediately after that, he began attacking them even more fiercely and lunging forward, saying that dodging attacks was too cowardly for the likes of them, and he wanted them to show him their true strength. Mordak began mocking them all, saying that both Chelsea and her precious familiar were simply running away from him like insects and couldn't properly fight back, attack, or defend themselves. He had already grabbed his spear, preparing to finish off Ji Yu-chuan once and for all, directing all his energy straight at him, and after that, a battle began between them. For a while, he was able to hold back the demon's shield and attacks, but Mordak began saying that they certainly wouldn't be able to stop him with just their pitiful strength. The numbers on his weapon were constantly changing, so they thought it was somehow related to the blows the demon could deliver. She began asking him why they kept getting injured, and he replied that he had definitely blocked the last attack, so he didn't know what was going on. Mordak began attacking again, saying that from the very beginning he had told him that this battle must end in Chelsea's defeat, and guaranteed that it would be so. Of course, she was the former queen and number one for all of them, but now she is much weaker, and that is a shame for her. The girl wasn't going to give up anyway, saying that whether she was number one in the past or not, she would defeat him no matter what. Mordak just kept laughing, saying that it might take a long time to break Chelsea, but he would definitely wait it out and do everything to make it happen. The girl turned to Ji Yuchuan, briefly explaining that something was wrong with this space and their attacks were being reflected back at them, and the guy said he'd noticed it too. This space inverts their attacks, turning them into mirror images, and this demon's weapons are very powerful. The higher the numbers get, the stronger the attacks become, and cover a larger area. They need to stop focusing on this demon and figure out what's happening with the space. Only then will they be able to find a way out of here. But suddenly, when it attacked them again, it managed to hit the protagonist, and he began to fall downward. Chelsea quickly ran up to him, telling him not to even think about passing out, and that she refused to have just a body instead of a familiar, but he could barely speak anymore. Suddenly, right beneath them, another pentagram appeared, created by this demon, but Ji Yuchun managed to get back on his feet. Mordak began saying that they could fight as long as they wanted, but one more blow and Ji Yuchuan's heart would stop beating for good. But quite unexpectedly, he began to sense another aura approaching him, and it became clear that the girl had managed to regain her power and was now controlling this space, not Mordak. He was greatly surprised to see this and hadn't expected at all that something like this could happen in literally a single moment. But suddenly, the mask covering Mordak's eyes shattered into pieces. Chelsea held the protagonist in her arms, saying that no one dared to treat the queen so horribly or speak to her in such a tone. Despite the fact that the protagonist was wounded, his blood resonated with immense power, which greatly surprised the demon. After a while, the team moved forward and destroyed the last monsters that were there, but just as Ba-in tried to contact Sigrism and Guzir, he reported that the connection was down, and there was no news from them. At that very moment, something exploded again, and the team immediately set up a barrier, while Xiana prepared to shoot, thinking there was another enemy out there. But instead of an enemy, they saw Sigrism, who was covered in blood and screaming that he had destroyed Guzir, so he had run to them in a panic, not knowing what to do next. The guy simply didn't know what to do with himself and was extremely anxious. He started saying that he had definitely destroyed that battle demon, but then something happened and he didn't understand anything at all. Lu Yao stepped closer, asking him to explain what was going on, since they didn't understand how he had ended up here. However, Sigrism replied that he himself didn't understand a thing and wasn't even sure who he really was. Ba Yin stepped closer, trying to calm the boy down, telling him to take a deep breath and try to remember exactly what had happened, because maybe this was some kind of trap set by their enemy. Just then, the boy began to recall that when he and Guzera had arrived here, there had been absolutely nothing. Just a strange smell in the air that was both sweet and utterly repulsive. After the last battle with Ji Yuchuan, he had actually thought he could control his powers, but for some reason, something inside kept pushing him to retreat, and in the chaos, the boy simply attacked Guzera. However, when the dust settled, he saw his sword stuck in Guzera's body, and after that he was terrified, not understanding what was happening. Ba Yin said that judging by this description, it seemed they had simply fallen into an illusion, since the entire team had searched the castle from top to bottom, and hadn't seen anything resembling what Sigrism had described. However, they shouldn't forget that the high-ranking demon was also here, and that could be influencing everything. Sigrism was glad to hear that Guzir might still be alive, and Lu Yao reassured him that although the boy's signal had weakened, it hadn't disappeared completely, so everything might be alright. After that, the boss sent Xia Na and Sigrism to look for Guzir, while Ba Yin had to stay with her because they needed to continue searching for Ji Yuchuan there with Chelsea. After a while, the boy finally came to his senses, though he didn't understand where his wound had gone, the one that had been very deep and large just a short while ago. But before he could fully recover, Chelsea's chains seized him, and he let out a cry. Realizing he could no longer move, Ji Yuchuan asked her what she was doing and why, but the girl replied that a simple man like him had no right to question the queen, though she admitted it was very bold of him. After that, the girl stepped closer and took him by the face, telling him to answer her questions and asked why his blood amplified demonic power and who the boy really was. Ji Yuchuan replied that Chelsea had been with him all this time and should know that he himself didn't understand any of this either, just like she didn't. She just sighed, saying that everything seemed obvious since there was no longer any need to defeat all the other ranked demons. She said that perhaps by taking absolutely all of his power, she could regain her full might and all her memories, along with what she needed, but the boy was certain she wouldn't do something like that. Chelsea was surprised that he trusted her so much, but he replied that he didn't trust the first-rank Chelsea. The boy said that he trusted the Chelsea who had signed a contract with him and who had become his friend during this time. At that moment, she didn't understand at all what was happening or why her power was gradually fading and leaving her body. Zi Yuchuan said that most likely the boost to her power from his blood was temporary, but he still preferred her just the way she was, since it was more pleasant for him. But Chelsea grew even angrier, ordering him to give her his blood. Now they understood that they had never found Mordak's true form, but at least the contractual bonds had finally been established. But at that moment, Chelsea called him over, intending to say something. She looked out the window and said she completely agreed. It was dawn, and only now did it become clear that they had been deceived. However, from the very beginning, they should have realized how to get out of here. The demon, meanwhile, realized that he hadn't been imagining it after all. And for a moment, Chelsea had indeed regained her power, so it became clear that the evil eye had deceived him. Meanwhile, the boss, along with Ba-in, kept moving forward, searching for something, and after grabbing a grenade, she threw it ahead. There was a powerful explosion, and after waiting for things to quiet down, they got ready to move on and press forward. However, at that very moment, they saw a silhouette in front of them, so the girl told them to prepare for battle right away. They didn't understand what this incredible power was, but they wondered if it was one of the demons that had attacked Guzer. However, they also realized that it was a mental-type power. Soon they saw this silhouette even closer to them, and just as they were ready to fight, Lu Yao stopped Ba-yin, saying that he sensed Ji Yuquan's energy from this approaching creature. And indeed, it was him, though there was another creature behind him, and the boy greeted his allies upon seeing them. To them, this greeting was too full of enthusiasm, but in the next moment, he used his power again. Ji Yuquan himself hadn't expected that Ba-yin could be hiding his power, because ever since he had mastered the power of the contract, he felt that his abilities had grown significantly. Ba-yin, in turn, said that perhaps the boy wasn't just relying on his contract power, but had also dealt with the demon that was here. And now it was clear that Ji Yuquan truly possessed demonic power within himself, just as that person had said. The protagonist remarked that it was now clear that the one whom Chelsea and he himself had defeated was merely one of Mordak's clones. His true form must not be somewhere around here. Lu Ya was surprised to hear about a 9th-rank demon named Mordak, as she couldn't even believe that someone like him had appeared here. The protagonist also said that the Demon of Victory must have some other goal. Hearing this, Lu Yao immediately created a portal, saying that Santenberg was in great danger, and they needed to do something to return there as quickly as possible and protect the city. Ji Yuquan walked through these corridors, realizing that the problem stemmed from this wall, and that the main source of it all remained right there. He thought that they might be inside the creature's belly, since that would be a logical explanation for everything happening here. Mordak's familiar was the Lost One, and it was he who was hunting Guzer at that moment. The boy tried to escape as quickly as possible, but realized that the creature had spat him out because he turned out to be inedible. And although the boy found this very rude and unacceptable, he was glad that at least he had survived. Guzer continued moving forward, saw the castle, and realized that he had transformed into it, and that his brother and the others might be trapped inside this monster's body, so attacking it wouldn't work. Also, his demon couldn't devour the monster from here, so he pondered that it would be ideal if someone could get inside this monster and destroy it from within. And as soon as Guzer thought of this, the monster immediately burst open, and he saw Sigrism and Xiana standing before him, who had just defeated the monster from the inside. He was very happy to see that Guzer was okay and nothing had happened to him, and the girl praised them for being able to defeat the creature. Sigrism was about to walk up to the younger man and hug him, but he immediately told her not to touch him because he smelled really bad. Xiana explained that if Guzer hadn't done this, Sigrism and she herself would still be trapped in the demon's illusion, so he had helped them a great deal. The boy was shocked because he could clearly see that it was their team that had attacked the monster from the inside, and all the credit belonged to them. Lu Yao and the others who had emerged from inside began explaining that this creature's organs were incredibly vulnerable. When it sensed danger, it expelled everything it had absorbed. Ji Yuquan had waited a very long time for the right moment, and fought his way through the red mass from the inside. Bella appeared next to Sigrism a little later, saying she could help him clean off the creature's slime. Ji Yuquan was talking about something, and then the guy said that they should save the conversation for later, because Mordak was still on the loose and waiting for them, and Chelsea was already itching to take down their opponent. Mordak was already in his place, thinking that very soon this place would become a paradise for demons once his plan came to fruition. Now his little dog was supposed to get his proposal, and very soon everything would turn out exactly as he and they wanted. He took Oshi's hand, and she said they would have to see whether they'd sacrifice themselves or sacrifice their king. As they moved forward together, Mordak ordered his pawns to advance, for they still had an incredible amount of work to do. There was an emergency on the city streets, so other people began to spread the word, making sure every resident knew about the situation. Others started shouting that they also wanted to live inside and believed that freedom should be for everyone, since they deserved equality. Meanwhile, in Santenberg, all the city leaders gathered in the conference hall to discuss what was happening. Mayor of the Rose Gentun began by saying that these high-ranking demons were a major problem and a headache, and that dealing with them through some sort of alarm system was a waste of time. Orland's Mayor Robert said that defending from within the walls couldn't protect the residents outside and would most likely be breached by the demons, so activating Heaven's Wrath now could minimize their problems. But Huaxia Mayor Zhao Rui ordered them to shut up, since he considered him just a piece of iron with no right to discuss human problems. Mayor Katarina of Yonglan said that she did not agree with Robert's plan, because among those outside there were many people who had helped with the recovery after the cataclysm. And we must not forget that Santenberg would not exist in its current form if not for those people. Therefore, she urged everyone to make the right decision. However, the mayor of Troyan said that using his city's tax revenue to allow these ordinary people to live there could not be the right decision, while another began to argue that the issue wasn't limited to that city alone, since they all shared the same territory. Mortimer, the mayor of the northern outskirts, said that this was a critical moment and that arguments wouldn't solve the problem, because we couldn't care less about some petty human hierarchies. In the end, he was simply curious to know what the final verdict would be, and that was precisely why they were waiting for their president. Then the man said that Wrath of Heaven would not be activated unless it was the last resort, and that she would do absolutely everything possible to protect those survivors outside the walls, and they had no intention of abandoning any of them. Jin Tong, however, even though he respected the president, argued that they were facing an incredibly powerful demon and his key lieutenant, so he didn't believe their current forces were sufficient to stop this horde. But the president said the mayor shouldn't worry because Dr. Lisa was implementing all measures to counter their adversaries. Jin Tong then smiled, saying that if the president himself said so, he would believe it. But time was still pressing, so they couldn't wait too long. Meanwhile, a girl who had barely crawled away was trying to contact the others. She had been out of range for an hour, so they began asking her what the situation was, and she reported that she had lost consciousness for an unknown reason, and now there were vines all around her. The situation was now terrifying, because she could see that the people outside the wall had completely lost control, and the situation was out of control. It became clear that they looked as if something were controlling them. Perhaps someone could use their mental ability to find out what was happening here. She tried to do at least something, but if this was an influence on consciousness, then perhaps she could use her ability to break through it and awaken at least something in these people. But suddenly she was struck and the girl fell, though Mordak caught her, realizing that the control was continuing to weaken by the second and thinking that he needed to hurry. He began talking to Asha, saying that he wanted to give her good food so that she would get better and gain even more strength. But despite this, she was also shot, and now she felt terrible, unable to fight any longer. The others were later informed that something had happened and told to report to headquarters that they had an emergency. It turned out that some people in the crowd were simply transforming and becoming predators right before everyone's eyes. These people were turning into monsters, and at the command center they could see it clearly. Eventually, the defensive wall was reaching its limits, and soon they might break through, so the leader ordered them to prepare for an attack. But his assistant said that there were still ordinary citizens outside who hadn't lost control and needed to be saved. But the man replied that their mission was to stop the destruction of the outer defensive wall, and if the president gave the final order, they would definitely launch the attack at that very moment. He ordered the drones to be prepared, and the moment they received the signal from headquarters, they would begin attacking the enemies outside the city. Meanwhile, Mordak watched everything that was happening here and realized that all of this was very predictable, and it seemed to him that it was all very pitiful, because they always fight each other at the first sign of danger, so he thought that was just their nature. The demon thought that this was the weapon bearing the imprint of the Dominion's power within them, and he realized that this was what the evil eye had spoken of when warning him about what might happen, and even these pitiful people had found a way to obtain demonic power. But Mordak said that as long as he could use this to destroy humans and free all the imprisoned high-ranking demons, his victory would spread throughout all of hell. Suddenly, he heard 6 more voices saying that his pitiful victory would end right there, and when the demon turned around, he saw a scythe held by Ji Yuchuan, with Chelsea standing beside him. Meanwhile, outside the wall, the infected were already trying to attack ordinary civilians, though a mother tried to protect her child, begging him not to come near. This man began attacking them regardless, saying that freedom lay beyond these walls and that those who did not want freedom, in his opinion, did not deserve to live. But just as he was about to strike them, someone attacked him, and after that powerful blow to the arm, the infected man simply fell to the ground. Sigrism merely said that he was acting horribly as he began to intimidate them, completely ignoring the fact that there was a small child there. Lu Yao stepped closer as the woman anxiously asked who they were, and they replied that they were protecting this city and that these people would now be safe. They immediately explained that they had rescued the citizens who were outside the wall, so everything was fine and they could move on. This man contacted the command center where the president was and asked what the next orders would be. Upon hearing them, he said he would carry them out as quickly as possible. Then he announced that all units must concentrate their fire, as the enemy was in human form and went by the code name Mordak, so they had to assist the unit where Lu Yao was right now. Whether anyone could take this place depended solely on the people who would help stop their enemies, and this man said they must stop Mordak no matter what. Meanwhile, the demon continued to fight Ji Yuchuan, saying that the two of them had arrived sooner than he had expected, but urged them to surrender immediately. In that case, he would allow them to witness his glorious victory with their own eyes. Of course, none of them were going to surrender, and the protagonist kept attacking Mordak the whole time, not giving him a chance to dodge or escape the attacks. But then Dewey also started attacking, calling this guy a cold-blooded person, and then added that he had prepared very well for the moment they would meet. After that, the people he had subdued began attacking them, and he said, "I'm curious to see what the guy will do now and how long he'll manage to hold these people back." Meanwhile, the others had already arrived at the outer residential area, and Guzer, along with the others, tried to grab these people, though they didn't understand at all what had happened to them, since they were behaving even crazier than usual, and it was unclear how ordinary people had gotten mixed up with these predators, which was infuriating. Lu Yao also created a barrier, trying to protect those who were still uninfected. As for the others, they said that Mordak was simply controlling them, and they must not be harmed. Everything possible must be done to keep them safe and simply lift the curse. The girl thought that Ji Yuchuan and the others had to defeat Mordak at any cost, and do it as quickly as possible, because very soon they wouldn't be able to hold out here anymore. Seagrism, along with her contact demon, also continued to attack these people, but tried not to harm them as much as possible and kept redirecting them to Lu Yao. Meanwhile, Ji Yuchuan had also managed to subdue several of Mordak's minions, and mentioned that he possessed mental abilities, so he likely wouldn't need the power of time. Ultimately, he wanted to give this small gift to him alone. Da was very angry and called the boy a pathetic person who had no right to insult him or speak to him that way. Suddenly, Oshia began to approach him. She was already powerless and simply drifted toward him. In short, she did everything the captain said, but the fire that began to burn her body hurt terribly. Mordak held her in his arms, saying that it really hurt a lot, and Ashka said she really wanted to go home. Only then did he start saying that he was very sorry that Ashka had already turned into a completely useless thing. Mordak smiled and said that she'd better share her power so she could be at least a little useful and give up everything she had left. She remembered her childhood and how when she saw the rabbits' bodies, they started telling her that normal people don't do such things. If she wanted to live with her mom, then she had to control this hunger and not do these things. Her mother said the girl could do it and that she believed in her. Oshia replied that she could do it and apologized to her, but only now did the girl realize that the end of life is truly excruciating pain. Meanwhile, the drones were already flying to the location where Ji Yuchuan and Chelsea were in order to help. The protagonist created a barrier when they suddenly began to explode, but it was getting harder and harder for him to hold it with every passing second. Ba Yin, who was with the others, also created a barrier, seeing that debris was flying straight at them, while the other people were simply too afraid to control their fear. Mordak, meanwhile, reappeared in his full form and ordered his demons to move forward and attack these people, intending to seize this place as a paradise for demons. The troops continued to attack them, opening fire and holding back these creatures as best they could. No matter how much they attacked them, these demons kept surviving, and the wounds didn't seem to affect them at all. So someone reported that their units needed reinforcements immediately because they simply couldn't withstand the attack. It turned out that these creatures were capable of regeneration, though it was hard to believe since no one knew if there were any units that could come to their aid right now. And as long as things continued this way, it was only a matter of time before the first line fell. The commander contacted the others, ordering them to mobilize the heavenly host, as their mission was to eliminate the enemy commander. Lu Yao and everyone else nearby heard this order and were told to confirm if they were currently in contact. It also turned out that a large number of demons had appeared in the city, and there was no way to send reinforcements at the moment, so they were effectively trapped there. Lu Yao, realizing that they wouldn't get out of there and that no one would come to them, understood that they had fallen into Mordak's trap and that everything had gone exactly as he wanted, right according to his plan. So now everything depended on Ji Yuchuan and Chelsea, who were fighting this demon head-on. The Oshi's power granted by the demon allowed for rapid regeneration, so their king declared that no one would ever be able to defeat these creatures. Mordak laughed and said they could make a new deal with them, telling Ji Yuchuan to simply hand Chelsea over to him, and in that case, he would spare him. The protagonist realized it was impossible to destroy all these creatures with his attacks, and at this rate, they would simply exhaust all their strength without even touching their main target. So Mordak would remain unscathed, and he understood he needed to act differently to prevent the plan from failing. The demon himself said that if they thought they could defeat his plan, meaning they could defeat him, then all these people were being far too naive. Immediately after these words, the protagonist found himself trapped by this demon and could barely move, realizing that the demon's power was far too great for him to handle. Mordak smiled and asked the boy if he could really achieve his revenge by making a contract with a demon like Chelsea, since he considered her weak, and then added that perhaps the demon of victory would be a much better and more suitable partner. However, Ji Yuchuan simply replied that he certainly wouldn't be the best option, since he was literally dependent on the powers of other demons. Then he recalled that pitiful defeat when Mordak fought Chelsea and reminded him of it, which made the demon even angrier, calling him an ungrateful man. Mordak had simply underestimated his enemy on the battlefield, and the protagonist said that this mistake would cost him the most and would be the worst mistake he had ever made. Immediately after that, his body was seized by chains that appeared literally out of nowhere. He couldn't move at all, so he just held onto his weapon, trying to break free. Meanwhile, Ji Yuchuan tried to attack him, but Mordak just laughed, saying that Chelsea wouldn't be able to hold him back in her current state, and it even sounded ridiculous. Then he pushed the protagonist away and added that their resistance was simply pointless. So he told him to let him in and allow him to take over his body, because Chelsea would simply be unable to save him from what awaited the boy. Ji Yuchuan began to realize that he, on his own, would definitely not be able to handle such power, and he didn't understand at all what he had been doing all this time, since he hadn't even had time to reveal the truth. When Mordak attacked them once again, they rushed to defend her, and she simply fell, wounded, right in front of him, while Ji Yuchuan was completely at a loss, just sitting next to her. Mordak laughed again, saying that in her current state she wouldn't be able to withstand such a blow, and it would prove fatal. Ji Yuchuan began to worry about her and simply hoped that she was still alive and would be able to get back on her feet, and that this blow would not be her last. Realizing they had literally only a few minutes to win, he took his scalpel to give her some of his blood and said he was leaving the rest to Chelsea. When her eyes were already closed, a few drops of blood from his hand fell into Chelsea's mouth. Immediately after that, the girl opened her eyes, and her strength increased significantly after Ji Yuchuan's blood entered her body. The others began to feel incredibly strong, and also said that the researchers were noticing something enormous beyond the city limits, something beyond their scale, so people began to fear. She had indeed become much stronger, and she said that this was her true power as a first-rank demon, just as the boy tried to stop the blood that was still flowing from his hand. Mordak, of course, didn't expect this to happen, but he started saying that he wasn't afraid of her anyway, and would win this battle no matter what. He said that this time she would definitely be defeated, and there would be no chance for a rematch or to fight back. However, Chelsea, having begun to unleash her power, said that Mordak's struggle would not lead to victory and was fruitless, calling him a pitiful creature. Her power was so immense that it pierced Mordak's body, and at that very moment, he could do absolutely nothing against her might. The other Special Forces members continued to attack these demons and noticed that they had likely lost their ability to regenerate, so there was a chance to win. They said to head to headquarters as quickly as possible because now was their chance to strike back and deal with this problem once and for all. Xiana asked the commander if this could be the result of Ji Yuchuan and Chelsea having defeated Lu Yao after all. Of course, she agreed with this, since that was most likely the case. Mordak eventually just collapsed to the ground, leaving behind nothing but a skull. But despite this, he kept saying that he wouldn't lose time and would win no matter what. She started saying that he was being too forward to talk about such things in his current state, so she ordered him to shut up right then and there. But literally a second later, an aura appeared that forced them to stand still. And before them appeared the demon Anspach, who said he never would have thought Mordak would be so stupid as to attack the city without his own knowledge, and declared that it was a foolish move, so he himself had to take action. Chelsea, standing there, didn't understand who was standing before her or why he looked so much like her, and the protagonist was thinking the same things. Anspach approached her, laughing, and since she could barely speak, he apologized for temporarily blocking their movements. But even after all these years, he said that Chelsea shouldn't have forgotten him. They had been quite close and had shared absolutely everything back then, so he was sure she remembered him very well. Even though he hadn't told her who he was to her, it was only then that she realized he was the same person who had stolen her power some time ago, and she truly began to remember this guy. He was the one who attacked her from behind and cowardly took her power, after which Chelsea became much weaker than before. The girl became incredibly angry, saying that she would destroy him right now, realizing that she had a wonderful chance to take revenge on the one who had done this to her. Anspach just smiled, saying that it was very impressive and that her passion for fighting warmed his heart, and he was very glad that he still held a place in her memory, though he hadn't thought Chelsea would stoop so low as to make a contract with some pathetic human. The demon said he would like to stay and indulge in memories, telling them all about his reign over the demon realm and how unstoppable they had become. But unfortunately, she was currently too weak and unworthy to communicate with him, so Anspach said they would meet next time, and then they would learn more about him. After that, the demon vanished, adding one last thing. They must become stronger because otherwise they would truly be wiped off the face of the earth. Ji Yuchuan himself didn't understand at all what had just happened, but suddenly Chelsea transformed into an ordinary snake and ended up in his arms. The boy realized that the demon who looked like Chelsea most likely had an incredibly deep connection with her, but the pressure emanating from Anspach instantly overwhelmed both him and Chelsea, so he understood what immense power this boy possessed, though he didn't know why he hadn't destroyed them right then and there. After that, the protagonist saw that the city's defense system was working again, so he realized that ahead of Lu Yao, the others who had come here had succeeded in defending it. Indeed, it was just as he had expected. Shortly after, the boy returned to the others, seeing that the enemies had retreated and they had just finished their work there, while Lu Yao asked how things were going with Ji Yuchuan. He reported that they still had several citizens suffering from the effects of this mental spell, and he intended to use the Dreamweaver to dispel the residual energy. The young man was about to begin using his power but realized he simply couldn't cast the spell. Nothing was working. After a while, they all returned to the main office in Sontenberg, where they continued discussing everything that had happened there. Sigrism, sprawled out on the couch, began saying that he was incredibly tired and glad it was all over, since he just wanted to rest and not get up. Lu Yao said that although this incident was over, there was still a lot of cleanup work to do, but at least they could finally rest a little. Guzera noted that their new recruit had returned very early, since he'd thought the guy had stayed with the other espers to continue helping them with this case. The protagonist replied that any of them could handle cleaning up the mental residue. Besides, he was already incredibly exhausted and couldn't risk anyone finding out that his dream creator was malfunctioning. Ba Yin also asked the boy what was going on with the demon Chelsea, how she was feeling, and what had happened at that location. Ziyu Chuan was very happy when the girl finally came to her senses, as he had been very worried about her. But Chelsea had incredibly little strength left, so she could only manage a few words. The teacher said she couldn't hold on much longer. She needed to share her strength with him right now in order to leave him at least some chance of survival. After that, she showed him her true memories, where a little girl stood with a weapon, unable to believe that she had managed to win again. The same guy, Ansbach, who had recently appeared before them, praised her, and Chelsea said she had defeated 5 ranked demons at once, breaking the advancement record among all the others, and now that she was ranked 6th, she asked how he planned to reward her. Ansbach held out an object, saying he would give her her favorite canned food, and after that, Chelsea promised she would become the #1 demon, since she had made a promise to her older brother. Ji Yuchuan was surprised when he realized that this demon was her older brother, and Chelsea said that was indeed the case. But Anspa was also the one who had wounded her and taken away her first rank status. Anspa was her older brother who supposedly supported her, but when it really mattered, he betrayed her and stripped Chelsea of her powers. Ji Yuchuan began asking why this demon had done such a thing, and why he hadn't destroyed the two of them when he had the chance, but had simply left. But the girl said she knew nothing and gave up all the memories she had left. She also said that Ji Yuchuan must be careful with this demon, for he is far stronger than he can imagine and possesses far greater power than anyone else. They have never encountered anything like this before, yet he will have to fend for himself for a while longer. Ji Yuchuan explained that Chelsea had fallen into a deep sleep and that there would be no contact with her for the time being. Sigrism was actually very surprised, as he hadn't thought that a demoness like Chelsea could be so seriously injured. After all, her opponent had been a 9th-ranked demon, and she was exhausted. At that moment, Ji Yuchuan said he needed to go to Rose alone, as there might be something there to help Chelsea recover, even though their boss was against him going there alone. Sigrism said it would be better to go as a group of 7, because the more people there were, the easier it would be to handle the problem. But Guzer told the elder to calm down, because they should have learned a lesson from how they acted as a group last time. Xiana supported Guzer, saying that he was right because the city was still on high alert. They couldn't afford to send most of their strongest fighters anywhere else. Ji Yuchuan just smiled and said that, after all, he was the one who had destroyed Mordak, so they didn't need to worry that anything would happen to him. Lu Yao said she understood everything and truly believed he could handle it, but she didn't understand where his sudden desire to act alone had come from. After a while, she went to the president and told him that since they understood how important Ji Yuchuan was, it would be unwise to let him go alone. But the president said he could go if that was what he truly wanted. Lu Yao said she really didn't feel at ease letting him go there alone, but the president explained that he wouldn't be completely alone. Having a reliable person to watch over him constantly would be enough. He told her to choose someone else for that role besides herself, since she needed to take care of her own health. Then she simply agreed with him, and her father said that since she had no further questions, she should rest, as the next task would be incredibly difficult. Immediately after that, Anspash appeared before the president, stating that they had finally activated Ji Yuchun according to plan. So the president should be pleased with what was happening here. But the man was very annoyed because Ansbach wasn't supposed to violate their agreement regarding Mordak's resurrection. After all, far too many people hadn't survived the attack, and Ansbach had even allowed him to attack the city. So if he hadn't sent Hank, the demon's plan would hardly have succeeded. But Ansbach merely smiled and said that all of this made this man completely different, because the sacrifices were small compared to the results they were getting. Ansbach urged him to hold off his complaints until the next stage of their plan, and for now he could continue in the same vein, and after that the demon said goodbye to him. Zi Yuchuan, meanwhile, was about to move on, but he realized that someone had been following him ever since he first entered this place. He couldn't tell if this person was an Esper, and since Chelsea was unconscious, his ability wasn't working, so the boy didn't feel very well. But suddenly, as he was walking forward, he heard someone greet him from behind. The young man was actually quite surprised when the guy took off his hood, and underneath it was Ba Yin, who smiled and stepped closer. Ji Yuchuan started asking what he was doing here at all, since he had warned the others that he wanted to come here alone. But Ba Yin explained that the boss was worried about him and Chelsea, so she asked him to join him. Ba Yin also said that it was so hot here that he almost lost sight of the boy, and Ji Yuchuan noted that Lu Yao had never let him out of her sight completely, so he wondered if she suspected something. In the end, the boy allowed Ba Yin to stay with him, but ordered him not to burden him or stop him, no matter what happened. Ji Yuchuan kept moving forward, considering that he was still having trouble with his ability in Chelsea. Ba Yin's presence might actually help avoid some trouble, but the only problem was that his mental energy was significantly stronger than his own. Immediately after that, Ba Yin left him, intending to buy something to eat, but the smell was so unbearable for the protagonist that he simply told him to get out of there. He told him not to speak to him at all and not to come near him because the smell was driving him crazy. But suddenly, they heard a strange sound. When the boys looked back, they saw those people transforming into predators, and they had already attacked the others lying on the ground. But before they could recover from this, these creatures immediately began attacking them, leaving them no chance to escape. Very suddenly, the main character shoved Ba Yin. He didn't understand what he was doing at all since the boy had been standing quietly behind him. Ji Yuchuan said that they had been working together for so long, but he had never seen Ba Yin fight, so he assigned these two sides to him. Ba Yin was annoyed by how he had behaved, but despite that, he began fighting them, trying to fend off all these creatures. Ji Yuchuan just didn't understand why Ba Yin had only mastered the basics, since Hank was a master of taijutsu, so they could have taught the boy much more than he had learned so far. While Bei Yin continued to fight, the creature was still alive, and one of them began attacking the protagonist, intending to devour him right then and there. But he was fully prepared for the attack, so grabbing his scalpel, he immediately finished them off, though Ba Yin was greatly surprised, realizing just how quickly Ji Yuchuan dealt with these monsters. The young man just smiled and said that they were merely rank B predators, and he didn't understand why it had taken his colleagues so long to deal with such monsters. He simply apologized, explaining that he usually only handled support duties, so he wasn't used to direct attacks or this kind of combat. Only then did the young man turn back and look at these people's uniforms. It turned out they were from the Eagle's Nest Esper unit, so he couldn't understand how these people had become predators. He tried to scan them and was going to upload the data to headquarters to see what was going on there and find out more. After that, the guy said it was time to move on, since they needed to go to the place where they might find some answers to all their questions. They went to a place full of mysteries, and while one man sat at a table studying maps, another person was floating in the air, effortlessly holding him by the face. He looked at the map and said with a smile that you had prepared a surprise, expecting the arrival of a certain guest at this place. Lu Yao and the president stood in front of the screen, seeing an image recorded in octaves, and the predators depicted there were clearly dressed like a squad from the Eagle's Nest. When the president spoke with Han Yu about the incident that occurred in Dorney, he had dispatched additional personnel to monitor the predators in various cities. And there was evidence that people from that city were trading large quantities of crystal cores and rose, so he sent Han Yu to conduct an investigation. His daughter said that perhaps their enemy wants to repeat the same tragedy that occurred in Dorney, but the president said there was no need to worry, as he had arranged for support forces to be on standby at all times, and Han Yu would also be among them. He said that his daughter was responsible for monitoring trends in the city and finding a way in from there, and that there would certainly be more serious problems ahead, so they had to be prepared. He also handed her an item saying it was the latest result of the doctor's research, which could mitigate the side effects caused by the genes in her body. The girl didn't know the doctor was conducting experiments, but he replied that it was a high-level confidential experiment, and she couldn't know about it given her rank. She just needed to know that it would help. Her father also added that he would then go to the city of Eagle's Nest to negotiate with Mayor Robert, and that she should get her body in order as soon as possible and keep him informed of any developments. Lu Yao simply listened to her father, but the girl had no idea how many more secrets were hidden from her in this place. Ji Yuchuan and Ba Yin, meanwhile, had already arrived at the right spot, though Ba Yin realized that it wasn't marked on the map. The boy explained that it simply wouldn't show up there. After a while, they went inside and it turned out to be a completely different world, but Ji Yuchuan told him to shut up again because he didn't want to smell fish in this place. Suddenly, the person hanging from the ceiling approached Ba Yin, asking why his breath smelled so bad. Ba Yin jumped back, not understanding why someone was hanging from the ceiling, and became even more frightened. And behind him appeared another demon who seemed ready to eat him right then and there. Ba Yin was so terrified that he began attacking him in an attempt to defend himself, while the protagonist stood calmly behind him, not understanding why he was doing all this. Immediately after that, he shoved him as far away from himself as possible, and the blow was so powerful that Ba Yin likely wouldn't have woken up for a long time. Yiv approached Ji Yuchuan, and the protagonist told him he was being too harsh, and Ji Yuchuan simply apologized, even though he didn't feel the slightest bit sorry. He just said that their shop doesn't accept customers without an appointment, and Ji Yuchun had come here with his friend completely on a whim. After that, Eve started running around him, saying that Ji Yuchuan could wear clothes that looked like cosplay. But despite all these comments, Ji Yuchuan simply said that he had come here to find a trader. He had an important mission. When Eve heard that the guy was looking for that old man, He said he could help and tell his fortune, but Ji Yuchuan said that the guy's predictions were often inaccurate. Eve also began to think that Ji Yuchuan had come here because his powers had vanished, but the guy repeated once again that he had come here for only one reason. Then he handed him a map, saying that he should be cautious because no one had ever seen this old man named Danilo, and he had a terrible temper. But in reality, it didn't matter what happened there. Immediately after that, a creature resembling a mushroom appeared, and it greeted them while looking at Ji Yuchuan. Ive immediately turned away, saying that the old man smelled terribly, but Ji Yuchuan didn't care at all. He only noticed that the old man had prepared everything as if he knew Ji Yuchuan would come to him. This creature said the journey had been long and that he had been waiting for him. Then he said the boy could choose one thing, and that this old man was the wisest being in the whole world. Only by passing his test could one receive advice or ask a question. Ive offered him something to take and said that if he chose noodles, he would never give him any again. But Ji Yuchuan replied that he didn't know how to smoke. That's why the boy chose a book, and immediately afterward, a monster appeared. He was told to destroy this creature, and after that, the boy would be able to get an answer to his question. Ji Yuchuan was already ready to start fighting, having grabbed his scalpel, but realized that this thing seemed much stronger than a Class 10 monster. Nevertheless, despite this, he prepared for battle. Even though a decade had passed, the power forged by his suffering in the orphanage was finally able to fully manifest itself. The creature began attacking the protagonist, and Eve was surprised to see that Ji Yuchuan referred to anyone who possessed any abilities as Xia. He wondered why his own power had vanished, as it seemed strange to him. Although the power was indeed absent from him, the blood boiling within him seemed to compel him to move forward and fight. Yiv asked what abilities Ji Yuchuan was using this time and why they differed from what had come before, to which the old man replied that blood could stimulate the destructive energy of his body's abilities. Ji Yuchuan was indeed ready to fight to the very end and didn't give up, attacking his opponent with needles because he was curious how much more the other could endure. Moving on, he mentioned that he had many knives and that it would be much more interesting for him to work with them, and after that he attacked the monster with them. The old man said that the young man had successfully passed the test, and now he could tell him what Ji Yuchuan wanted to know. The young man asked why the dream maker had disappeared and why, after all these years, it had reappeared. But in response, the old man asked when the young man had first noticed the emergence of the power of justice. Ji Yuchuan thought for a moment, saying that after the dream maker disappeared, he immediately rushed into the city and accidentally encountered a predator. And at the moment when he swung his sword out of reflex to defend himself, the power appeared. Then the old man asked when this power had disappeared, and the boy replied that when he used mind reading to escape from the shelter, that justice had vanished. From all this, Ji Yuchuan understood that the dream creator and justice seemingly complemented each other, and the man agreed completely. The existence of the dream creator suppressed the instinctive, powerful force and thirst for destruction within him, and his true power was justice. When the boy chose the book, he thought it might provide him with at least some answers to the questions that interested him. But it seemed strange to him that the old man already knew he would come to him. He also suggested that the young man choose those things that, thanks to his enlightenment in a certain area, would be able to help him. Ji Yuchuan used his power to defeat the monster, and once again noticed that it had awakened within him. Then the old man began to use the book and decided to start with his parents, back when the boy was still a child, and everyone wondered how such a small child could possess such a powerful mental force. His father said they had no other choice, as there might be a project within the organization capable of saving this dire situation. Eventually, they came across some strange people and they had to begin carrying out their plan. The plan was to summon a great demon who would help save the world, and they were given this mission. But just then, Chelsea appeared before them. She said that for such a modest price, she wouldn't revive the child, because the price had to be as high as what was being asked of her. She asked why they wanted to save the child and told the two not to answer if they wanted to get anything. But she sensed a strange energy from this child, saying that it wasn't in her nature to do such a thing, because if they told anyone, she would punish them and take back the power they had borrowed from her earlier. Chelsea touched him, saying that she would temporarily share her power with the boy in order to revive him and give him the chance to continue living. But she also promised that in time she would come and take the power back, though no one knows when that moment will come. Ji Yuchuan realized that his parents had joined the Qi organization to obtain Chelsea's power, and his parents had destroyed the organization because they had taken away the power they had wanted from her. He said that was all true, but the organization wasn't sure if the boy possessed the original power, so they sent him to the shelter to verify it. And the final confirmation of that power lay with Anspa. Ji Yuchuan asked if this had anything to do with the Qi organization, and asked him to either tell him everything or keep quiet, since he had received a lot of information today, even though this was completely unlike the old man. To explain that the boy wouldn't always be able to understand what he meant on his own, but Ji Yuchuan decided to tell him absolutely everything, because he wanted to get his life back, and in the end, she was the key to success. And he simply praised him for being able to find the right path. Eve then began talking about how the boy had even asked him to tell his fortune and if all of this was true. In the end, he was glad he'd started doing it because if the fortune-telling proved true, he'd become a sticker seller, which made him very happy. Eve showed one of the cards, saying that what could help Chelsea was right here, and pointed to another card. Eventually, after some time, they arrived at the rewards team. A man led them inside, inviting them to come further. Ba Yin said he thought it would all be more like a school, but here it was some kind of banquet hall, though that wasn't surprising since this city was the richest of all those remaining. He also began asking the protagonist why they were here in Ji Yuchuan. The protagonist replied that the device that would help Chelsea absorb the devil's power and recover soon was located here. Ba Yin was truly shocked, as he had thought that this item had been destroyed, and he hadn't expected anything of it to remain in this city of Rose. Meanwhile, as they were heading upstairs, a girl noticed them, watching where the two were going. The guy who was guiding them asked them to wait a moment since Mir would be arriving soon, and left them in that room to wait. Ba Yin and Ji Yuchuan sat and talked quietly, and the boy asked what Ba Yin had wanted to tell him, since he simply didn't know if he could trust Eve. He'd heard that all these devices were manufactured with certain defects that could only harm them. Ji Yuchuan simply said that while Eve's predictions weren't always accurate, she never lied, so there was no doubt about that. Ba Yin was referring to the fact that 5 years ago, the Alliance had been fighting the Predators, so the Superpower Enhancement Plan had been launched. Initiated by the Alliance of St. Paul, the City of Rose was supposed to manufacture the necessary parts, and then they were all assembled at the Eagle's Nest. This device could transfer various superpowers to one another, and in this way people wanted to develop these powers, but the experiment failed, and as a result, all these people became Predators. Later, President Liu personally shut down the plan, the research results were kept secret, and resuming the project was prohibited. Ba Yin added that everything seemed to be over, and most likely no one expected that this device would remain in Rose. Ji Yuchuan wondered whether any Predators were left in the Eagle's Nest. They were startled by a girl who came up to them asking what they were talking about. It was Jin Kangkang, the mayor's daughter, who had come to talk with Ji Yuchuan.